And we're doing one of these things again. Fucking shit shooting Sunday. Jeremiah Arding. I'm Insanity is Free. Y'all can find me on my internet presences by throwing a rock. And this is Shit Shooting Sunday. We have several different perspectives on one topic, and normally it gets lost in the weeds. So I hope you like the worst kinds of Russian thistle rolling across the screen. But to get the housekeeping out of the way, this show is sponsored by LibertyMugs.com, and it is supported by viewers like you or listeners like you if you're listening to this on YouTube for some reason, since I don't have an audio-only version yet. And if you want to support the show, there are various ways to do that in the comment or in the descriptions below. And then you can say in the comments, if you want, how you supported the show. So you're like joining the Nazi train of communism. So anyway, without further something or other, everybody introduce yourself one by one.
Nazi train of communism, you mean a train to Auschwitz?
Sorry, what?
A Nazi train of communism, you mean a train to Auschwitz?
It could be. It could be a gulag.
No, the Nazis didn't have gulags. They had concentration camps. Gulags are what the commies did.
Yeah, but it's a Nazi train to communism. So it's a joke. Get it? Because you're dealing with somebody who's been called both pretty regularly.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. Anyway, introduce yourself. Plug your shit if you have shit, and try not to get constipated.
Hello, I'm Seawall. I'm just a dude on the internet. I exist, but I don't like plugging myself. So.
Yeah, there you go.
Go on, Dino.
I'm Dino. I do things on the internet as well. I'm the host of the Dino Files show on Alternative Internet Radio, AIRAD.io. And I also write on the Rogue File, roguefile.com. And that's actually about it. That was weirdly... Oh, Twitter, at Dino Files, no spaces, no dashes.
Cool.
I am Lupinant. I'm on Minds and on Steemit as an Arctic Wolf. I've been writing on rights and reality for quite some time now, and have been publishing a few pieces regarding voluntarism in particular and trying to develop an actual logic proof for it.
Cool. So, that be the cast, and today's subject is Minarchy versus Anarchy, because y'all have never seen a video about that before. Am I right? I'm probably not. But this is a fairly diverse cast of minds here. We'll possibly be getting more later on in the show. And with this... okay, we got one of them dropping just for a second. But we've got a fairly diverse cast of people. We should be getting more popping in a little bit later. That's how Shit Shooting Sunday works. It's already very distracted and sort of train wrecky, so it's perfect. It's like seasoned perfectly. Anyway, the topic should start with this question. Do you believe a state can be ethical?
It can act towards ethical goals, but its existence could be called unethical. But the alternative is also unethical, so... And ethics are highly subjective at the same time.
Right. My view is morality is subjective. Ethics is an objective interpretation of a shared moral standard, which one would have to agree to in order to believe that it is ethical. As you have no agreement, signed or otherwise, with the state, it is inherently unethical.
But can you not choose to go somewhere else if you do not agree with
That's a traitorous critic. That's a traitorous critic argument. It's not a logical argument. It's basically a form of ad hominem. If you don't like it, leave. It's actually got its own name in the fallacy books, basically, as called the traitorous critic, because you're basically saying, well, you don't like it, therefore you're a traitor. So you should just
No,
leave.
I'm saying that you can.
I'm not saying that's what you're
system.
saying, but that is the argument basically. If you don't like it, just leave. Now, to be fair to Minarchy, this is the only thing I will say to it. If it is basically done to a township or county or even subsection of that level, the argument then has some merit, because you can actually leave and change your laws. But to be quite frank, you can't avoid having to deal with certain things in most Western societies, unless you go to very remote locations where people aren't going to bother you. And that really does make it quite difficult to say if you don't like it, leave. And if you don't like taxation, there is very little you can do about it. And personally, I don't like being stolen from.
Yes, I don't like being stolen from either, but there is the argument of also necessary evil.
There's no such thing. Evil is evil. There is no such thing as a necessary evil. If you're willing to accept evil into your life, fair enough, that's your choice. But I would try to avoid it at all costs.
Yes, but there also are necessities in life. Would be a good example? Let me think. Oh, Dean's back. Hi, Dean.
Hi. Yeah, I had to go fix my lag problem. I had a massive lag problem.
Yeah, I was noticing that, to be honest. Also, what can the state be ethical is the question at hand.
Even the minarchists is saying no, in short.
Well, the definition of a state in my field is political science, and the definition of a state in political science is an organization that has a monopoly on force. And it is my contention that in order to gain a monopoly on force, the state must necessarily behave in a way that is unethical. So, no, I don't think a state by definition can be ethical. I think I think having a monopoly on force and being an ethical organization are two, they're mutually exclusive. You can't be both.
Well, even though in a pure conceptual form it is unethical, there is kind of the counter-argument of if you do give monopoly of force to one organization, that one organization can make sure that the use of that force is used ethically. Whereas if we go basically back to there is no central authority, especially for the justice, how do you prevent prevent massive miscarriages from one grouping together, saying, "Hey, if you come into our area, if you walk by our area, you got to pay us everything you got, or we're gonna kill you."
Well, the problem is
how would you prevent that
verbiage. The problem in your verbiage is that you said if you give a monopoly on force, and no one ever does that. In fact, it's conceptually impossible to give a monopoly on force. A monopoly on force is taken, and that's what makes it unethical. Is it takes away by extension of self-ownership, people have the right to use force in defensive ways, in ways that are ethical. And when the state takes that away, when the state says we get to decide when force gets used and we get to use it on you and initiate it on you, that's a use of force that is taken away, not given. The people didn't give the government a monopoly on force. The government took it. And that's what I'm saying by the mere conception of a state being radically unethical. I don't even think it's somewhat unethical. I think it's radically unethical to have an organization with a monopoly on force.
Yes. But people still can defend themselves under that system through self-defense.
Unless the state says they can't. The problem isn't whether or not the state says they can't. The problem is that the state has the power.
Then the state becomes a true tyranny. And at that point, the people would have the ethical duty to fight back, using what means necessary to defend themselves from a tyrannical state. If a state has been granted through the people's will of forming a state, and they say, we want the state to cover the justice system, to give a certain amount of protection, we will also do what we can to protect ourselves, but we have these expectations, If the state does not meet these expectations or tries to strip people of their ability to defend themselves, it slips into tyranny, and then the people have the total right to destroy the state and either reform it or rebuild it.
Well, what you're talking about is
let
what,
me ask
what Weber calls a process of legitimation. And when you say like the people agree to have a state, they never do that. That's what I'm saying. That you're arguing that Weber's legitimation is a real thing. In political science, legitimation is just however the government convinces the people that it is legitimate. In the United States, it's done by convincing the people that their government is like for, by, and of the people, and it also convinces it. The process of legitimation is furthered in the United States. Well, the process of legitimation is further done in the United States through elections and through giving 51% of the people the power to control 49% of the people. The problem is that neither of those things is legitimate, and Weber's process of legitimation that you say, like when people say that they should have a government, Weber's process of legitimation is a bullshit process. It's a lie. And the mere fact that you're not allowed to simply say no to the state is what proves that Weber's process of legitimation is a lie.
Then why not have a referendum for people to dissolve the state? Have people decide, do we want to have a state or not? It is a simple
they've tried to do that. Look at any place that has had secession efforts based on a referendum. If you look at what happens in those states, they immediately get crushed. Look at what happened in Spain just what was it, a couple years ago?
Catalonia. It was last year. It wasn't even that long ago. I mean, the president has had to fucking flee the country. The president of Barcelona and Catalonia basically had to leave the country and got caught by Germany, and is going to be extradited back to Spain. They do not fuck around with secession movements because they know they are the way.
And yes, Europe is a tyranny that has never actually had freedom.
You cannot be allowed to have, if you're a state, if you're an organization with monopoly on force, you cannot let people leave. You can't do it. It doesn't work, because what happens is, if you're an organization with monopoly on force, and this is a logistical reality, but it's also bared out through history, you are not allowed to simply say, I don't want to be a part of this, because the state will not cede power. It never will. The state will not cede its slaves. It never will. The state will always try and maintain the same level of power as it has always had.
Look, to me, this boils
through history.
This boils down to a simple issue, and it's the concept of collectivism versus individualism. The concept of the state itself requires collectivism to be true, because the group, that is politicians in this case, or the government, or whichever group you wish to enable with the agency to rule others, that group is treated as it would be in collectivism, in socialism. It has all the rights. The individual's rights don't really matter if the group has a priority. And it doesn't matter really how many levels of interference you put into that, it will still exist. And that underlying problem will always exist. And that's why it can't exist in the long run. It will eventually have to die, or we won't evolve. We will continue to move forward in this loop of constant cyclical nonsense where everybody is affected by everybody else's mistakes instead of just the people who had to deal with it directly. And that's why I say the efficiency argument makes no sense to me when people say we need a state.
And it happens because the state, that collectivism is put into place because the state first usurps the legitimate use of force. And I say usurps because they take that away from the people. It is stolen. It is a right that the people have, the right to the legitimate use of force, that is taken away by the state by definition of being a state. And that's when you put into place all of those things that were just pointed out, the collectivism, all of the the fact that nobody is allowed to be insulated from the mistakes of another. And I'm not saying that every man's an island. I don't believe that. But in a state, everything's amplified. Everything it's like an amplifier. If you put an amplifier on a radio, all of the things that go through that radio go however much farther that amplifier is designed to make them go. And the state serves incredibly as an amplifier of mistakes and inefficiencies.
It can be an amplifier in certain situations with certain individuals, but it also can limit the damage of individuals as well.
But does it? But does it really? Because what you're arguing is that if there's a monopoly on regulations, things improve. But that has not been shown to be the case. In fact,
when did I say monopoly on regulations?
Well, you mentioned the fact that the state can prevent forms of harm. Yes, and to me, that's beyond. That goes beyond defense. That goes to like defensive, like protection from people from harm and food and things like that. It goes a lot farther than just the concept of a military or a defense force. It opens up the door.
Well, I was more referring to situations like if look, you say that you're not an every man's an island, correct?
Correct.
Here's the problem.
Not
as more people can congregate into an area, I think the largest you could have where it's still considered more of an anarchistic society is about 300 people.
That's if it's socialist. If you're talking about a commune, I would agree, because the complexity issue becomes too huge.
Yes.
If you're talking about a capitalistic system, a system where everybody voluntarily agrees to the hierarchies that they wish to choose to be a part of, then that becomes a much more different equation, because people can buy the services that they need. The companies can buy the auditing that they need. And the people who are liable take the liability. They take that responsibility on.
And how do you prevent theft, and how do you prove liability?
Rights enforcement agencies. Instead of having law enforcement officers, you use rights enforcement agencies like the ones we mentioned yesterday. Vipers, that's a rights enforcement agency. It's not run by the police. It's run by a private company. Same as the ones in Virginia. Same as the ones in Vermont.
Have one company using one rights enforcement agency, someone is signed up to another. The person says this company's product harmed me because it was defective. Rights enforcement agency goes to them and says, oh, no, our rights enforcement agency says we did nothing wrong. And
then it goes into arbitration, doesn't it? Just like it would in a modern society.
But arbitration, yes, it can be done through private organizations, private courts. If they cannot agree on what a third party to use, you come to deadlock.
Whereas you don't come to deadlock. You either have a judge who makes a decision.
But
you have a judge who makes a decision.
But how is that judge? But how is that judge legitimate? How is he legitimate?
Because both the people, because both the companies have agreed we will abide by this judge's decision. If you won't agree to abide by a decision like that, who the fuck is going to want to trade with you? Think about this capitalistically. Think about the reputational damage you're suggesting somebody takes in that situation. This is what I was talking about, risk.
Yes, but here's the thing. The company can make a legitimate argument. This guy's claiming our product was defective. We're claiming he misused the product, and it's his fault, and we don't want to use the judge he's recommending.
How are you doing?
Because that judge, we don't trust him, and he's not willing to use the judge we picked, and it becomes a big cluster.
They would have had to have agreed to the judge beforehand. That's the point. They wouldn't even be having the case that way. That's what you'd have to deal with that.
It'll probably hit between like 9 and midnight.
Dean, don't know if you're on the right call for that.
Yeah, you may be on the wrong call, Dean. But as I'm saying, so what you're saying is when you're buying the product, they're at that point agreeing to have an arbitrator involved if something goes wrong. from the get-go.
Between the two companies, yes.
Well, between the
Basically,
company
look at
and
it
the-
this way. Look at it this way. If, say, you get mugged, okay, in a rights enforcement situation, you would be paid by the rights enforcement agency for failing to protect you. And you would be compensated more than what you lost because of any emotional damage or just the chance to basically say, look, this is what it is worth to us to keep you as a customer, okay? That's you out of the loop, okay? You don't have to worry about it anymore. The rights enforcement agency now has to take it to the other person. If the other person has an agency, he can say, look, I didn't do it. I didn't mug the person. That's when it goes into investigations. Two companies present their evidence, just like you would in a court of law today. The two agencies would present it to a pre-agreed judge, somebody that they both believe is fair and distributed within the market of judges that are available. Then that court session would be held. The judge would listen to both sets of arguments, review the evidence, and make a ruling. That's how private law works. If you're talking something about maybe criminal law or something, you could potentially have a voluntary jury pool as well involved in one of these sorts of things.
Or panel of judges, whatever.
Yeah, there's a number of ways you could solve it, but you can't get that choice unless you have the free market running all of those systems. It's just not possible. The minute you have a single source, you have a subjective reality that one or many people are trying to impose upon everybody. And it won't work. There is no way you can make 300 million people think the same thing should be true across so many different issues within society. It is a calculational impossibility. It's not just implausible. The maths are incredibly hard. But if you use capitalism, you basically turn all those variables down to one. And it all just basically deals with the number of people you as a company are willing to take on.
Okay. Yeah, I do see the argument for private law, but cannot private law exist within a system with a minarchist state? The minarchist state says we do have judge, we do have this stuff that is...
Why should it?
Let me ask you, are you familiar with the Whiskey Rebellion?
I've heard of it, yeah.
The argument of why can't this exist within a minarchist state, there were people saying that the government shouldn't tax them for whiskey. And the government said, no, we should. The people said, we're not going to pay you. The government came in with the army. Funnily enough, the people paid because they didn't want to die. And that is how the state works. It started quite well. And then within, 10 years, immediately failed to uphold its own constitution.
And those people who were living within the state, were they not benefiting from things like protection from the army, from potential foreign invaders? Were they not
I'm not so certain.
Were they not utilizing
Who was invading the U.S. at the time?
Yeah, nobody at the time of 1789 was actually invading the U.S. In fact, the next war was us trying to invade Canada, and then the U.S. getting its ass handed to it by Britain.
Yep.
So I would say that America at around that time had a bit of, shall we say, teenage rebellion towards its neighbors, rather than claiming that it was...
I think we're getting a little lost in the weeds on that, but
yeah, a little lost in the weeds.
What I'm saying is...
I have zero problem getting lost in the weeds, by the way. Otherwise, this would be a very short broadcast. Should we have anarchy? Yeah, no. Well, that was a great talk.
Well, no, what I'm saying with the Whiskey Rebellion is the fact that they were within a state that had a standing army, that is basically a warning to other large entities saying, hey, this is this area and these people under our protection. Don't fuck with it. And those people, because they were living within the United States at the time, they could have gone east to an area that was basically uncolonized. They could have said, you know what, we don't like this, and they could have left. They still had that option at the time. They said,
That's
no, we want all the benefits without paying for it. We want the state to protect us, but we don't want to give them money.
But nobody's saying that. But nobody's saying that we're not paying for this. This is the point.
I think the primary problem that I think the primary problem that you're doing now is now you're trying to justify taxation, which is not possible to do, especially ethically. I'll say to you what I said yesterday to who was it?
Just call him socialist.
I'll say to you what I said to Porpoise the other day. If I were trying to make your point, I would not be trying to justify taxation. I would be talking as much as possible about donation. Because here's the problem when you start trying to justify taxation is you're saying that theft is okay. That's what you're saying. You're saying that so long as you hold a monopoly on force, theft is okay. And you cannot make that argument in an ethical way. So what I would suggest would be
not logically.
Don't try to. Yeah. So what I would suggest would be don't try to justify taxation. If I were making your argument, I'd be talking about donation exclusively. I would not be saying that the state should be supported by compulsory taxation. Simply because you've taken now the biggest, the most obvious theft that the state does, and you have turned it into a voluntary exchange when you make it donation. So, I don't think you can justify taxation.
Well, the type of taxation the only type of taxation I want to see is basically a poll tax. If you want to participate in the government, you have to pay a poll tax.
Well, the problem with that is
so if you want to vote, you have to pay for it.
Yes.
The problem with that, though, that you run into is that everybody falls under the power of whoever gets voted in, not just the people who paid to vote. So you're then taking the representative part, whatever might be representative about government, which is very little. There's really nothing representative about representative government. But you're talking about stripping that away entirely and just creating the type of system.
Yeah, basically a voluntary tax that's based on that's a percentage of your income, and you get vote.
Well, the problem is if you're trying to buy vote, buying votes is bad. We know this.
Yeah, we know this. And to be fair, the percentage of income argument is perhaps the worst possible implementation you could use for it, because the most wealthy people, if they're, say, having to pay 5%, they're quite happy to do that if they then get to decide what the laws are. They're very happy to pay that amount of money if they then get to decide that they basically run the show. And as they're contributing the most tax, like any good company, you keep your best customers close. Remember, everything works in Pareto when you're talking about economics.
But there still is the counter of even though you could make, but there's the counter of then there's all these pissed off people who are going like, wait, hold it, we're paying the tax, we're paying the percentage tax too. It says here, anyone who pays this tax gets the same amount, basically the same amount of influence within the system. You're not listening to me, and there's a lot more of us than there are of them.
Yeah, but if you've got the monopoly on force, who's going to stop you?
Yeah, you have a monopoly on legitimate use of force. That's the problem. But you can't. I would come off.
That's not a legitimate use of force.
I really would.
But the problem is that the group saying what is legitimate is the one that is also in control of force. So it doesn't matter what you think. It matters what the government says. We're talking about what is, not what should be. This is how government actually works. If it didn't work that way, then if May is lying about Skripal, for example, she'd be voted out immediately with a vote of no confidence in the UK. I don't see that happening. I don't see that happening with Trump. I don't see that happening with any politician. When's the last time you've seen a politician actually face justice for any of the things that they have put into law or done without proper authority?
In the U.S., they had to get Nixon on basically spying on people. Like they were like there's
no, they got him on contempt. They got him on contempt.
They got him on contempt. They didn't actually get him on anything to do with spying.
Yeah.
They got him on contempt of court because
that's what he lied about.
Yeah, it was 18 minutes of tape or something like that he wouldn't turn over.
Yeah, that's what he lied about was the stuff. But that's what I'm saying is effectively it was that, right? It's the same thing that Bill Clinton had to leave for. Yep. He had to leave because he lied to the court, not because of what he did, which is a whole other situation. But
he managed to avoid impeachment, though.
Exactly. No, because he resigned.
Yeah, well,
no, he didn't resign. No. He never resigned.
He was so close to the end of his presidency, they didn't want to go through all of the proceedings.
Yeah, there's a big difference.
Basically, that's like like somebody murders somebody, but they only have 2 days left to live. Is it really worth it to spin the courts up? Just keep him locked to the bed and let him die.
Yeah, it was a lame duck presidency, mate. I do remember that one quite well.
Let's say Clinton did it in '94. Oh, it would have been a fucking field day for the Republicans, and they would have won '96.
Yeah, easily.
Especially if they could.
It made him look really, really petty instead.
Yeah. And the thing is, they went after the wrong allegations. They had much better allegations they could have gone after. But that's, again, getting into the weeds of political history.
But if you're looking at it now, they're trying to do a Clinton 2.0 on Trump with Stormy Daniels before the White House.
And it's backfiring.
And it's
horribly.
It's backfiring massively because nobody gives a fuck.
Well,
because nobody gave a fuck about Clinton.
Well, let's be completely.
It's a completely different situation. The Stormy Daniels stuff is Trump is and was a playboy, a New York playboy. So a lot of people go like, "Oh, he slept with a porn star. Cool. Why are we caring about this?"
Yeah.
And then the next part is, from what I can tell, an amount of money was given to her in exchange for her silence.
Yeah.
And because they're not going to the campaign finance committee to do that, which what they should have done in this situation because they claimed it was campaign finance violations, I'm thinking Trump used his own money.
Of course he did. He's not that stupid.
Yeah, and what they're doing now
is Democrats would do.
Yeah.
Well, if you consider it though, this can't be wrong. This can't be bad for Trump because he gets to do whatever he wants in terms of corruption, while all the quote anti-corruption journalists are focused on this.
Yeah,
that's true. But what happened was that Trump's lawyer, paid his personal money to Stormy Daniels, and that's why it becomes a campaign finance problem, is because it looks like a donation in kind to the Trump campaign.
Well, the problem is, the thing is, the money went through like a couple of different companies. So, do they even know where it originally came from?
It originally came from the lawyer. We know that. We know it originally came from the lawyer. Yeah. But that's the thing though too, is that if it wasn't paid back to the lawyer, then it looks like a donation in kind. Yeah, and that's why you have a campaign finance problem. The problem is it takes the organizations that police that kind of thing, it takes them years to do anything anyway. So nothing's ever going to happen to Trump over this thing, and people need to get the hell over that.
It's actually not only that, but the conduct of the investigators with grabbing all of the files, the judge not granting, I think it's like a master of documents, immediately upon this, and saying, "Oh, we're just going to put this in an FBI database that you guys can access." Yeah, that is 8 levels of everyone is getting fired for this. That's
one of the biggest issues.
I don't foresee Rosenstein, Sessions, or any major positions at the DOJ surviving, apart from the OIG, because they've been doing the Office of the Inspector General.
Inspector General.
They have been doing. No, that's fair enough. There's so many fucking acronyms now, mate. It's almost impossible to work them out anymore.
I think we all agree FDR was. I think we can all agree FDR was the worst American president because he made all the alphabet soup.
Among them, he's
in my top 5.
Yeah.
Yeah, FDR and Woodrow Wilson are my two least favorite. But
Yeah, the two worst.
Wilson, FDR. I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of Truman. Clinton, and only for the Rwanda massacre, to be quite frank.
Oh,
That alone.
That's
that
a whole
alone.
situation.
That alone
Yeah.
pissed me off so fucking much.
Well, the
that
Reagan administration was pretty shit too, because you had the whole Mujahideen situation.
Well,
Yeah,
not
but
only
the
that,
Berlin
but
Wall fell.
yeah, but also Reagan had to deal with Democratic Congresses the entire time.
Yeah.
He
And
had to wheel and deal to do anything.
he knew how to play people, so he at least was a decent politician.
Yeah.
But
The problem
Clinton,
with them going and
ugh.
taking all those files, in that raid, the biggest problem with them going to take all those files is that it's a massive Fourth Amendment violation.
Oh yeah, as I've said, basically I've said that situations
Fourth
like
Amendment's
this.
dead.
Well, it's not only the Fourth Amendment's dead, but they may it's on its deathbed, but we may be able to shock it back. And if we shock it back, it's going to come back a hell of a lot stronger, because every judge will be looking at this case going, oh, hell no, I ain't granting this. Do you have recorded evidence of this lawyer talking to him that would stand up in court as it is?
Well, that's
No.
and then they also have, you also don't know, this is the problem. If they try and make any legal moves on any other clients of that law firm, then those, well, that's what I'm saying. Those any of the clients, or you're right, or the individual lawyer, if they try to make any legal moves on those, that it's never going to be able to work, because you will be able to make any lawyer worth his weight in fucking.
Well, have you ever heard of the legal term "fruit of the poisonous tree"?
Yes.
Right. Yeah, everything that's been involved with Trump has been fruit of the poisonous tree from day one.
Yeah, it's been poisoning the well.
Yeah. Well, the entire forest is poisonous trees at this point.
But that's the problem, is that when they try to move, if they try to move on anyone else involved in that law firm, all they have to say is the thing that prompted this investigation was obtained illegally. You went in and you took files. You violated the Fourth Amendment. You did not have a warrant for these files for this client or for that client or for this lawyer or that lawyer. And this can't stand up in court because you did not legitimately.
Yeah, and this is going to lead
acquire this evidence.
This is going to lead to probably a resurgence of a lot of constitutional values, because it's one of the things they've stepped too far.
Yes,
No, this is a bridge too far. It's a bridge too far. What they've done, Trump's popularity is picking up.
I think you have 50% roughly 50% of the people who are so anti-Trump. I mean, you see Trump derangement syndrome happen. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere.
It's becoming terminal. People have terminal cases at this point.
I don't think anybody's going to care about constitutional values or constitutional liberties when it's attacking Trump. They're just going to fucking go with it.
Well, the problem is only a third of the nation hates Trump to that extent. Only a third. If you're looking
at Twitter, if you're looking at Facebook, remember, you are dealing with what, shall we say, is a bit of an echo chamber now.
Yeah.
They are both very bubbly. Very bubbly. Yeah. And as a result of that, I'm pretty sure you guys are dealing with a lot of people who are very focused on making sure Trump is eliminated with expediency.
Yeah.
I see the other side. Yeah. I see the other side. There's
what we call the dark underbelly.
Yeah, because I go through places like 4chan. I go through places like Vote and Minds and all of the other networks, most of their user base is either US or Western at least. And particularly in Google Plus, one of the biggest communities that I'm a part of is the libertarian community. So shout out to them. They're almost 80,000 strong in that community alone.
And I've got a feeling that they're actually have a very diverse set of opinions on Trump. Some love him, others dislike him, but are willing to work with him. Yeah,
they're willing to deal with. They're willing to. Most of them are willing to deal with some of it.
Yeah.
Personally, I could see the man hang or see the man succeed. I don't care. I'm well
doesn't matter to
distanced
me
from
either.
it at the moment, simply because of my location.
Well, that's one of the things that I loved about. That's one of the things that I loved about the actual campaign. The 2015-2016 campaign season was
the Trump train, man. That was a fun drive, man.
Dude, it was so much fun. Here's the thing:
2 years of campaign.
Yeah. I'm just sitting here, and I'm sitting back, and I'm watching people talk about Clinton and watching people talk about Trump, and I'm just it's really, really fun. It's really, really fun to be an anarchist in these times because I do not have a dog in the fight. I don't care who wins. They're both going to be bad as far as I'm concerned. So who cares? It's amazing to watch. But one of the things that affords us, I think all of us here, even the minarchists among us, one of the things that this affords us is a certain amount of objectivity. And one of the things that I've seen is that Trump derangement syndrome doesn't cut one way. You were talking about seeing the other side. You were talking about seeing 4chan, and I spend some time on QAnon boards just because QAnon, I think, is a sociologically fascinating phenomenon.
It is hilarious.
QAnon,
how many surging autists have managed
QAnon
to not
is,
heard of QAnon? Oh my god!
I gotta tell you what QAnon is. Okay.
Yes. Sorry to derail it even more.
No, it's amazing. I love talking about this because, again, it's sociologically fascinating.
It's like 4D chess in like text form.
Exactly. There's a person. I'm gonna say a personality or a set of people on 4chan who go by QAnon. And what QAnon does is QAnon posts what used to be more specific, but has now become more cryptic. This has been going on for years. What used to be more specific, but has now become... No, it's been popular for months, but the earliest QAnon posts go back to, I think, early last year. Like, that's when people started, like, paying...
I started following it around October of last year, when it really kicked off. And Q became a noticeable figure on 4chan.
What they do is they post what used to be more specific but are now less specific. They're now more cryptic posts on 4chan as if they're an insider in the Trump administration. And they know
White House Anon. I've heard of it.
Yeah, kind of. What they do is they go through and they post these cryptic things about like it's coming, boom, 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 blah, 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 like trust the plan, all this other stuff. And they like the boards on these posts and they try to decode them in an amazing way.
Yeah,
it is incredible. But this is the thing. One of the things he does do is he uses the Socratic method.
Yeah.
And it is very clever how he uses it, because I was following it when it started, because like Dino, I found it fascinating. I don't believe 90% of what is going on within 4chan, but every now and again there's a gem of truth.
Oh, yeah.
And
kinda
weird
like Alex Jones
things, weird coincidences. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It is
before he started saying, before he started claiming all the frogs were coming gay.
Actually, there's a lot of truth in that one, scarily enough.
they call it so if you go to the Reddit board /r/Great Awakening, they're one of the communities that follow QAnon and try and decode the post. And this is the most recent post, April 22nd from QAnon. And it's a 4chan post, says, not official product -5 eyes. Listen carefully. No evidence to support POTUS targeting. None. Do you understand the gravity of what's unfolding? Evil and corruption, in all caps. She had to win at all costs. You know why. How do people support / vote for these people? Video, and then it's a Fox News link. And that is one of the least cryptic of all the QAnon posts that I've read.
To be fair, they are incredibly weird.
What I'm piecing together with that is basically, if they were making predictions, Trump is about to basically be complete. He was going to come out and completely say Trump is not under investigation at all. We are wrapping up. Right. We found nothing. The had to win stuff points to Mueller recommending further investigations into Hillary Clinton and her cronies.
Mhm.
Right.
And-
That's what.
Exactly. This is
That's
this
part
is
of the
what we're
4D
talking about.
chess that
It's just-
QAnon is trying to imply is that
Yeah.
that things are happening in the background that are going to bring the entire liberal democratic establishment down. And
he implies
it is,
wheels within wheels.
Yes, exactly. And it's sociologically fascinating again because if you read through these boards, you see people who are going back to old QAnon posts from months ago and just saying,
Yeah.
"Oh, he used the same number this with reference to this, so maybe these two
God.
things are connected." Like if QAnon posts something like, if he posted the number 55, people would dig all the way through QAnon posts. They would go to post number 55. They would go to any post that had a code that ended with 55. They would go to any post that had the number 45 in it or 55 in it, and they would be digging through and making connections and making links. In
Maybe
ways that
even
are-
45, you know, 'cause honestly, it
4chan
has the number
is-
5 in it.
Is there
Yeah.
okay? Quick question: is there any evidence that this is not just trolling, or
No.
is it?
no,
Ooh,
whatsoever.
hang on.
There's
There's
There was-
one
there
thing.
was a small
there is
thing that
one
happened.
thing.
Yeah.
on
There's
Twitter.
a few things that happened with regards to QAnon on 4chan that make it a bit more because what would happen is whenever QAnon did say something that then it became a bit more realistic and got released in the news a few days later, what would wind up happening is this unusual pattern of certain floods of basically Nazi content where all of these bots would flood the channel with random anti-Jew Zionist stuff to try and muck up what was going on. Because I'd watch it in real time.
So
And it was hilarious to watch because he'd post a picture and then all of a sudden there's just random Jew rants for about 4 to 5 minutes. And then
Yeah.
somebody will finally open it up again and start up a new
One of
comment
the
on, okay.
coolest things
Yeah.
that happened with
Well,
QAnon
yeah.
was that they
Well.
asked QAnon to post. They were testing QAnon, and they
Yeah.
said, "If you're real, make Trump tweet wonderful day." And the next, no, listen, this is
No,
amazing.
within like
This is
minutes. Within minutes.
Oh God!
Well, it was the next. It was the Thanksgiving tweet, and the Thanksgiving tweet from Donald Trump had the word "wonderful" higher in the tweet, and it ended with Turkey Day. And so they were
They're
like,
like, it's happening! It's
yes,
happening!
exactly. And so it's one of those things.
Mainly a post that occasionally gets lucky. It's the most likely scenario.
That's what I think.
Maybe.
I think it's just. I
Maybe.
think it's just luck. I don't think QAnon is legitimate. Or
I don't
it's very
know.
possible. It's very possible that QAnon is legitimate, is an insider, but is trolling.
Yeah.
I personally, no, I don't think it would be an insider trolling simply because they're a bit, unless they have like a legitimate authority, they would get fucked up the ass for doing it.
Oh God!
And the NSA is watching.
If I were Donald
No,
Trump's
no.
13, 12-year-old son, this
Okay,
would
guys,
be my favorite
tinfoil
pastime.
helmet time. Tinfoil helmet. Trump is QAnon.
No, he's not.
That's
I'm
been
sorry,
kicked around.
Trump is not Q. That's been kicked
That's
around
been-
so many
It has
times.
been kicked around. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
That
I know,
one's
that's why I said
hilarious.
tinfoil.
I think
That's
that's
why-
ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
But what's
the
amazing-
QAnon conspiracy is phenomenally hilarious, and at the same time, it is unusual because it's the only one I've ever seen that survived for this long on 4chan.
Yeah.
And it actually
Yeah,
had to move to 8chan because it got banned from the 4chan boards.
Yeah, because 4chan is a bunch of
Still
kills
active.
at this point.
Yeah,
But that's
pretty much.
what's incredible about it is that the what I find so fascinating about the QAnon phenomenon is that you're seeing, I think, a microcosm of the Trump train when you're looking, because it is the Trump train. It is 4D chess, trust the plan.
No. You're pronouncing it wrong. It's 64-bit D chess, and Trump is the grandpa of that sport.
Exactly. So, but reading what these people put on the boards is it's amazing because you see a microcosm of what's happening with Trump fans. I think that percentage of people who are massive Trump fans, you're seeing a microcosm of what's happening in their own little sociological bubble, because you're seeing people on these QAnon boards getting frustrated because nothing seems to be happening. And you're seeing people on the QAnon boards who are incredibly upset with the way that Trump's handling things. Trump's comment about take the guns early, due process later, that sent the QAnon boards reeling, because you had people in the QAnon boards who were massive Trump supporters who felt like that was a huge betrayal. And then you had people in the QAnon boards who were massive Trump supporters who said, this is just another dimension of the chess, basically.
Well, the thing is, don't want to give too much credence to the QAnon guys, as like, guys, if you're listening, I'm not saying that you're illegitimate. I'm saying that what is most likely happening.
I will say they're illegitimate.
I'm saying I don't know. I'm in the I don't know category right now, and I'm going to stay there because I don't want to be noticed.
Well, the thing about it is that, like, and I wouldn't be so brash about it, but the idea of, like, using an anonymous message board to deliver actual pro-government messages should be a red fucking flag to anybody. And suddenly a board that's very concerned with spooks on a regular basis is not at all concerned about the, like, sort of, inherently shady nature of this bullshit. And it seems like bullshit. It seems like trying to reel people in to the Trump narrative. It seems like, really, if anything, grassroots pro-Trump propaganda bullshit.
Exactly.
The thing that gets me, guys.
Okay. What's up?
The thing that gets me is the connections that QAnon kept trying to make to, like, Trump being the savior of mankind and, like, the second coming of Christ.
No,
there's a massive religious undertone to the whole thing.
No, I understand that, but this is the thing. Part of it makes me think this is Project Bluebeam on a shoestring.
Well, have you guys heard the conspiracy theory about Steve Bannon?
Which one?
What? Which one?
Actually, Barron Trump from the future to help his dad win the presidency.
Yes.
Oh, I love this.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it so much.
That was the funniest fucking LARP ever.
Yeah.
Oh my god. And people in the QAnon boards have tried to tie them together.
There's a massive contingent among, like, reptilian conspiracy theorists who do believe that time travel is legitimate, and they buy into a time travel story from the late 90s, late 90s. I think it was on forums in the late 90s. And it's this story of this dude basically. Kind of, it's kind of a very early creepypasta, and but they buy into this, and reptilian conspiracy theory is amazing, and it ties into QAnon as well. There are massive people in the QAnon boards. There's a massive number of them who are also reptilian conspiracy theorists, and it's amazing sociologically to sit back and kind of watch the conspiracy theorists argue about which conspiracy is better.
Yeah.
Which, that's what I'm going on record as saying. I'm a proud conspiracy theorist. I just think a lot of them are wrong.
Yeah,
that's the thing, is I love conspiracy theory. I just am not a huge fan of. I think the problem, my biggest problem with conspiracy theory, and you see this a lot in anarchist circles too, is anti-Zionism and things like that. But
well, anti-Zionism is fine as long as you're anti-Zionism and not anti-Jew.
Yeah,
that's the thing though. But those two things get confused a lot. And
I'm an anti-Zionist. I'm also an anarchist. I mean, I have a lot of labels that I personally apply that have negative connotations. Because to be honest, and I've thought about this for a while, fuck them all.
It's also whether or not it also depends though on whether or not the protocols of the Elders of Zion is real, and it's not.
It doesn't mean that Zionism, which is the idea that that there should be a Jewish state and that Jewish state is endowed by God or blah blah. that does exist. Zionism as the
Yeah,
term
absolutely.
actually
Yeah,
it does
Zionism as the state is God does exist, and as any anarchist, we are all against it, I am certain. But
And,
Judaism is a different issue, and the problem is most people conflate the two.
And while we have Mance on, because he has to leave pretty soon, he's going to do a debate of his own. Mance, why don't you tell people what you do?
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I have a podcast. Podcast is Free Man Beyond the Wall at freemanbeyondthewall.com. It's on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play. You can go to any one of those, search Free Man Beyond the Wall. You'll see it. Episode 103 was released yesterday. I have 2 books. My latest book was released this week. It's called The Kids Are Not All Right. Meme-enhanced primer on encroaching Marxism in the West. And tomorrow, if you want to check it out, I will be live at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Dave Smith's Part of the Problem podcast, and we'll be talking about my book.
Cool.
Cool.
That's excellent. One of my favorite introductions to you, Mance, is the episode of Liberty Weekly that you did. That was months ago at this point, but that was an excellent episode of that show, and I think it's a great introduction to you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I love talking to Patrick. He and I have a lot. He and I have a lot in common, a lot to talk about, and yeah.
Patrick's great. I did a show with him too. He's a really, really cool guy.
Yeah, I have nothing but good things to say about the guys in Liberty Weekly, and they partner with Keith Knight at Don't Tread on Anyone podcast, and the actual Anarchy guys, all those guys,
the actual Anarchy guys, and the who is it that does? Is it Actual Anarchy that does the film reviews? Yeah, that's a really good podcast too. I love that.
And
show.
by the way, if anybody is interested in having this angry dude on their podcast, let me know. I will be more than willing.
Okay. All right.
I'm gonna have you back on Dino Files here pretty quick. At some
All right, cool.
Yeah. Also, conspiracies make great movies.
Yeah, they do.
Excellent
I mean, Fear and
movies. The
Loathing,
best.
I mean, what was the one? I was listening to the Conspiracy Court with Bird and Carr, I think, and the Anarchy Ball.
Yeah.
And they did one on Adrenochrome, which was popularized via Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And the whole thing is like 90% bullshit because again, it gets tied back into the QAnon bullshit and Pizzagate, apparently, somehow, because apparently these elites are sucking the brains of children.
There's
no, this is the thing though. It's in order to get adrenaline, which is produced in a gland above the kidneys. So I don't quite know how they're drilling into the pituitary gland or the pineal gland, or whichever one they would do it.
Look, if they're talking about growth hormone, they'd be partially right.
Yeah, growth hormone is where they were drilling, but apparently they were trying to get adrenochrome. And the adrenochrome is somehow
like
produced
for water and pumping out oil. What the hell?
It's like drilling for oil and pumping out water.
When people talk about conspiracy theory movies, how come no one ever talks about conspiracy theory? It's one of the best movies. I watched it on a plane like 6 months ago, and it's so much fun. And it's like Mel Gibson at his most insane. I mean, it's like Mel Gibson playing himself.
I think it's because that one's real. That's the problem. It's Mel Gibson playing himself, and I do wonder if he did suffer from MKUltra, which has been legitimately
the
confirmed.
Connection.
Yeah,
what's amazing?
Some of the claims about it are definitely exaggerated, but it did exist.
Yes.
Yeah, it did, and it was Timothy McVeigh Timothy McVeigh was a victim of an early precursor to MKUltra, but that's one of the things that I want to do.
That's impossible. That's impossible. MKUltra started in the 50s, and Timothy McVeigh was I mean, they were doing MKUltra experiments in the 50s. I mean, they were kidnapping hookers off of the streets of San Francisco, throwing them into rooms, feeding them with tons of LSD, and then torturing them for 2 weeks to see what they would do.
I might be thinking of Kaczynski. I tend to confuse the two. But it was one of the early experiments that was at the university.
You mean artichoke?
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I know me and my MK.
One of the things that's amazing is if you watch Stranger Things. Stranger Things has massive ties. No, I'm serious.
No, I know.
Stranger Things has there's a really interesting kind of like, it's half fan theory and it seems like it's half legitimate, where there's supposedly Stranger Things has connections to like MKULTRA and things, not like real world connections, but like it's about that. And
it's inspired by would be the best.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely inspired by it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I actually want to do is I want to talk to Bird about taking Stranger Things to conspiracy court and see how that works.
Well, is anyone going to be giving that conspiracy guy Chappaquiddick and see what he does with it?
Chappaquiddick.
Yeah,
I know this one. What's that one again?
Oh, it's basically based on the quote unquote true story of what happened with Teddy Kennedy.
Oh yes,
with the woman
when
in
he
the car.
drove off a bridge with some girl in a car and killed her.
Stefan Molyneux did a pretty good breakdown of some of the other plausible theories about that. My favorite is that he wasn't in the car when it crashed, and that he ran off before that because to get away from the cop that saw him at 12:45, well after the ferry stopped, and he swam back to his hotel. And that's why he acted completely normally until the cops came up, until two of his lawyers came up and said, "Hey, they found this girl dead in the car that has your name associated with it." That's when he found out. That's why he was normal until that point. So
one of my favorite websites for this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go for it, Mance.
I think it's funny that someone brought up Molyneux's name and everybody went silent.
Yeah. Yes, I know his nickname is Molly Meme, but when it comes to breaking stuff down, he's a pretty good job.
Well, and I'm
just
silent.
Wally Wally.
Food. Like, this is the first meal I've had today, so I'm eating it with my mic muted.
Stefan Molyneux is one of those that, like, I actually used to follow him, and I really fell off of following Stefan Molyneux because I don't like him anymore. He got a little bit. Well, I'll tell you what I saw in some of Stefan Molyneux's stuff, and especially in his fan base. I saw a lot of the earmarks of what looks like the way that cults work.
Yep, I've heard a lot of those claims,
and
I've seen some odd behavior.
Yeah,
There's
I don't
odd
really,
behavior associated with him.
Yeah,
exactly, and I don't like the idea of cult-like stuff of supporting it or being a part of it or whatever. So I just dropped out of it because that kind of thing frightens the shit out of me. Because that's the most, like, if you research cults, or if you listen to especially last podcast on the left when they talk about cults and things like that, you start to see how nefarious it really is.
All you have to do is research Scientology.
Well, here's my problem with calling the Free Domain Radio a cult, because the reason he's saying what he's saying has some ethical backing. I mean. He's talking about leaving parents who abuse you, and talking about, like, more concrete forms of abuse than than other people are willing to talk about. And in doing so, he seems just like the cults that say leave your family for this cult, but he's actually providing a really fucking good reason for it. And it's not so that you can achieve spiritual enlightenment. It's not so that you can, like, ride off on a UFO. It's so that you can be a better person.
He's walking a very fine line between the two. Let's go with that.
Yes. Yeah. And that's fair, but to say that it is a cult, to me, is not fair at all.
Yeah.
When that starts, I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying I started to see those things developing to a certain extent, and anytime I see that, I check out.
Well, you want to talk cults. You want to talk cults. How about this? Free Domain Radio is a cargo cult. And the reason it is a cargo cult is because if you go into Free Domain Radio expecting anarchy, which the podcast still exists, there's a bunch of why I was wrong about insert anarchist concept here. And there's a bunch of support for Trump that came later. And so now, if you accept one part of it, you sort of lured into the other parts of it. So I could see it being considered a cargo cult very reasonably, but to call it some sort of religious cult or something similar to a religious cult, to me, that's drawing a really fine line for oneself to do that.
No, that's fair enough.
Yeah,
I
no,
mean,
and I
to
do
me,
that. I will freely admit that
Yeah.
that there are perfectly legitimate organizations that I refuse to follow simply because I see that kind of thing happening. It's yeah.
Example, I'm
Good God!
curious.
Any number of well, when I was a Christian, any number of churches that talked about not talking to your family if they don't believe like you believe.
Yeah, so certain sects of
That's a
King-
massive check please moment for me.
King James
I'm not
only
saying
people.
Stefan does that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not
Sorry,
saying Stefan
Mans?
does that, but I am saying that if I see cult-like things happening, I immediately check out. And it's not even necessarily because the organization's a cult. It's just because I hate any of that around me.
Unfortunately,
Fair enough.
certain tight-knit social groups also exhibit similar things to a cult as well. So it's just it's a weird. I would call it too much of a thing, not of a good thing or a bad thing, but just too much of a thing becomes bad.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's part of the issue.
Boxes and it squicks you out. Would that be a good way to say it?
Yeah, it just wigs me. I just don't like it. What were you saying, Matt?
I'll tell you the whole IQ and race thing. People really need to read Thomas Sowell's new book, Discrimination and Disparities, because I'm over halfway through it. I read more than half of it just today, and it's basically just it will pull you away from all that IQ stuff. I mean, when he starts talking about how how 22 of the original Apollo astronauts were either firstborn children or only children, and just growing up, how you had an all-black high school in Washington D.C. in the 50s that was 74%. 74% of its graduates would be Phi Beta Kappa in college, and I mean, it's just he's just basically destroying all of these arguments. And if people
the
logically,
IQ and race thing,
logically there is no connection between the two.
Yeah. There's interesting overlaps in studies, but those are also there's selection bias involved. There's all kinds of other issues.
And because the academy is so fucking terrified of the answer, they've basically suppressed any attempts at new research which could definitively prove it. So unfortunately, we kind of have to partially work off of what little does exist.
Well, the problem is I mean, it always boils down to education, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yep. For the most part,
the people who
Man's gone. You're very faint, by the way.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm on a tablet today. The people who and what I think is hilarious is the people who are talking about race and IQ. They're all talking about it when it comes. Just nail it down. Bring it right to what it is. They're talking about voting. That's all they care about. It comes down to voting. And these people want to call themselves ANCAPs. They want to call themselves anarchists. And all they care about, and they want to talk about the one thing that we know doesn't help. It doesn't help anything. Or they want to talk about the culture and everything. And all they have to do is look at. You can look at a ton of studies just talking about how this culture to this culture to that. How to I mean, there was rampant racism in the early 1900s for black people who grew up in the North, and black people who were emigrating from the South, who were coming up from the South. I mean, they hated them. They had they said we don't need these people in our neighborhoods and stuff like that. So I mean, really believing that this IQ stuff is settled science, which is basically that's what they're talking about. They're saying it's settled science.
What it's just not. At best is a loose picture saying, "Hey, there might be something to it, but we need a hell of a lot more research." We need.
I mean, there's some things about IQ.
Yeah.
There are some things about IQ research that are very good. I mean, IQ is an excellent indicator for success and for the ability to succeed.
Yeah,
you might want to read. You might want to read Thomas Sowell's new book, because
no, I mean, this is something that Jordan Peterson quite.
When IQ, well, yeah, but when IQ, if you're the firstborn with a high IQ, you have a tendency to be a lot more successful than the fourthborn who has a higher IQ than the firstborn. The firstborn usually does better than the fourthborn, so it has a lot more to do with it.
To be fair, that is actually logical, though, anyway, because your firstborn is the one that you have the most resources for economically. Yeah. And I'm not saying that does. Yeah, exactly. And that doesn't. I'm not saying that doesn't take out. Yeah, I mean, this is a statistical problem at this point. We'd need a lot of data here to work out if IQ is not the determinant. Yeah. And because I'm certain there's some really stupid firstborn kids out there who don't succeed.
Yeah, there are plenty of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is part of the problem with this discussion.
How many firstborn are on this call?
Me. No. I'm actually only child.
I am not.
I'm a firstborn, and I'm massively unsuccessul. So I guess take from that.
Firstborn and doing our starting out.
I'm a firstborn.
I'm firstborn, and I consider myself fairly successful in my field. But the point is that we've got a 2/3 gap here. I've also technically got a Mensa level IQ, but I'm not Mensa.
That's the thing. Is this part of the problem with the IQ and race discussion? Is that there's, number one, any studies that are out there, you can pick apart. And it doesn't really matter. But you can do that with any statistics. You can do that with any studies. The problem with the discussion is, number one, it's incredibly divisive, and that means that no further research can be done on it.
Yeah.
Which I think, personally, I don't care. It's fine. Yeah. The second issue with it is that because of its divisiveness, you can't really, the only people who talk about it that I have seen in the circles that I run in are people who are simply free speech absolutists rather, who want to talk about it because it's taboo. And that's what I think Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson do. Because I feel like they want to talk about it simply because it is taboo, and to prove sort of their ideal of free expression and how society shouldn't silence people, which is true and a massive part of I think I have the book right here. Actually, no, it's over on my shelf, but of The Kindly Inquisitors, one of the greatest books ever written. And there's going to be a new edition coming out, and I'm so excited. But that's the thing about it, is that there's so many ulterior motives to talking about it. That's why I basically don't, is because there's no real there's no benefit to it.
Look, the best option to solve this problem at the end of the day is we stop focusing on it and we switch to a merit-based system and get rid of this minimum number of black people in your company or you don't get a business license bullshit.
That's part of the problem. But one of the things that you run into with that is that the intersectionalists and the social justice people, one of the things that they do, if you start talking about meritocracy, they start acting like you're automatically being racist in a way that I find incredibly insulting and racist.
Oh yeah,
they'll talk about
like everyone says Republicans that all the racists became Republican. No, the racists stayed Democrat. It's just they took on the
racism doesn't have a party. That's the real point.
Yeah. Racism doesn't have a party, but one party seems to engage in it far more than the other.
There's different brands of it too. There's the racists who are in the Republican Party who are like KKK style racists, and they're not the Republican Party, but they are there in it. And then there's also the racists in the on the left, I'm gonna say, because they're not typically Democrats. They actually tend to be more socialists. But there's the racists on the left who, again, you start talking about meritocracy and they start talking about how you're a racist. And the only conclusion that can be had from that is that those people actually believe that people of color have less merit
Yeah.
And
Yeah, they don't understand the logic of their
insanity.
own argument.
Yeah.
None of them
Yeah.
understand the logic of their own argument. None of again in education, nobody fucking learns logic when they're young.
Yep.
I benefited from
It is a
that,
massive
but
problem.
Well, a way
Yeah,
we could
it's a
teach
huge
people
issue.
logic through education that probably would be actually able to pull off. Have you ever seen those really simplistic programming languages that are like little puzzle pieces you put together to do simple things?
Oh
Yeah.
man, I hate those games, those quote programming games that they have kids playing in elementary school.
It's still
Yeah.
logic puzzles. It
they're
is a
still
logic puzzle.
puzzles.
Yeah,
And
they're a
it
logic
is something
puzzle.
that forces them to learn logic.
Yep. There's also a game called a
problem
Space
with
Cabinet that does a lot of
those
the same thing.
But
My
it
biggest
doesn't
problem with
act,
that too is that it doesn't actually teach what it's supposed to teach. They purport to be teaching these kids how to program, and what they're actually doing is they are not. They're just having kids put puzzle pieces together to make a thing move, and it's kind of like I've watched kids play it, and they're not actually learning what they're supposed to be learning.
No, it's
if
an
we're brutally
introduction
honest,
to it.
though, it's an introduction to it. And to
Yeah.
be fair, when you're talking about computer programming, 90% of it is putting puzzle pieces together.
Yep.
Sure, and I understand that.
That is what I mean. I've managed that kind of shit.
Too is that they don't actually teach. They don't actually teach computer science. It's like trying to teach programming for the sake of teaching programming without actually
How old
understanding
are
what's
these
happening.
kids? How old are these kids?
These kids who are playing these games are straight up second graders, and they don't know what to call the
6 or
component
7.
parts. But yeah,
6
they
or
don't know
7,
what to call the component parts of the machine that they're playing on, but they're still playing this game that purports to be teaching them programming. It's crazy.
But they are at least getting a functional understanding of how logic works, correct?
To an extent, I mean, it depends on how much of it's done for them.
It's
in the game.
undefined. It's undefined. I'll agree, but it at least gives them some basic level.
Yeah.
That's better than what most kids have been getting, especially in the public school system. Because, like I keep saying, I benefited
I would say
private.
as they move on, once you move from elementary to middle school, you graduate from these more simplistic puzzle piece languages to some form of basic or something from the C family. And
the problem is they still don't teach. The problem with it is they still don't teach computer science. They don't.
Yeah.
They do not teach kids computer science. This is something I'm aware of because this is the field that I work in. I'm an educator.
Yeah.
They don't.
Okay.
These kids are not taught computer science.
Yeah.
They
if
are.
we want to teach computer science, we better teach them binary, machine code, and assembly.
No. I'm talking about. I'm talking about the most basic levels of computer science. I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I'm talking about kids.
Like what is an array?
Yeah.
That
even,
kind of thing.
Even what is, frankly, what is a terabit? What is a terabyte of data? They don't know this because they've been playing these programming games since elementary school. But when they're in middle school, they still can't tell you what a terabyte consists of.
Yeah. That can easily be remedied with a general computers course can teach you that.
That's what I'm saying, though. They don't teach that.
Yeah, we need to combine the programming course with the general computers course, and then as they move on, at least get them to a basic fluency in like a C-based language.
I've been pushing for this forever. I've been saying that each year, kids in computer classes need to assemble a computer. Just assemble it.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter.
I mean, I'll be honest, that's what I did in my uni course. Is like one of the first things that we learned how to do was how to build a fucking computer. Now, I already knew.
We had basically the CompTIA A+ course as an option to take.
Well, we didn't even get the option. The computing course taught us what the hell each component part was. We had to identify them as part of a pop quiz.
Yep.
Well, that's part of the question, though, too, is that these kids in high school now, that you've got kids in high school and middle school using iPhones, and they think they know a lot about it because they know the right button to push, but they don't know what the component parts of that thing they're holding is.
Not to be funny, mate, I don't know what the fucking component parts of 90% of my fucking phone is, and I'm using it right now.
It's all the same. It's all the same from machine to machine. They all have GPUs. They all have CPUs. They all have systems on a chip. They all have.
I know the structure and the design. I get you, but I could not tell you what kind of Snapdragon whatchamacallit I've got on my fucking phone.
That's not necessary.
That is not necessary. that's changed every year, and that's the realm of computer scientists, computer engineers, electrical engineers, whatever flavor you want to use. That's their concern, and that's their field.
Okay.
The people who are core nerds who sit
Yeah.
there and look at the Snapdragon processors and test them and see how they perform
But
on
the
their
thing
phone
is,
because they think it matters. They think it's going to matter in a year and a half.
We're actually coming to a very dangerous potential in probably the next 50 to 100 years of a technocracy forming. Of like my friend, my electrical engineer buddy calls it the
AI-based.
No, not AI, not AI based. It's actually still people operating most of it. It's called the 80. He calls it the 80-20 split, where 20% of the population knows how the stuff works, how to use it to most of its functionality, and how to repair it and build it. Whereas the 80%
Pareto principle.
Whereas the other 80% are controlled by technology. We're getting
It's
very
a
close.
Pareto principle.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. It's the
There's
Pareto principle. That it's the same principle that functions within economics, within nature itself, for growth rates of plants.
Yeah.
This is where it was originally found, and then they found it actually applies to human society in the case of every market. The top 80% of every market is controlled by the top 20%, and within that 20%, the top 80% of the market is controlled by the top 20%. And it scales up. It'll go until you reach to the one individual who controls a huge chunk of the market. Exactly. It's basically like a Fibonacci tree.
Part of the that's part of the problem though that I see in these kids' education. One of the things that I think computer science, I bring this up because I think computer science and logic are linked in a very real way. And as much as you could teach a kid, as much as I frankly could teach a probably sophomore or junior in high school logic just by giving them the rhetoric textbook that I read in college when I was taking my rhetoric course. There's a lot of, that's where I learned most of what rhetoric is and where logical flaws lie. Is by learning how to use.
I mean, from my perspective, it's easy to learn logic, rhetorical logic. It's very easy because it's got a very good list of "thou shalt not do this" set of rules that you have to follow. And if you do that, you will have a logical argument, guaranteed, no matter what.
And mathematical
as long
logic
as you
is
avoid.
Fuck yeah!
Mathematical logic is much harder, and that's math proofs is how I learned logic. I had to do those in high school, and I actually really fucking enjoyed them. It was one of the most entertaining things for me to do, was to prove that yes, this angle does work, and you can determine a triangle by knowing two sides and an angle, kind of thing. It was possible.
That's the thing that kind of though that's the one actually form of math that I was any good at was actually geometry.
I mean, geometry, I am shit at spatial awareness, so I'm shit at geometry, unfortunately.
I'm one of those weird guys that I'm decent at geometry and I'm decent at calculus, but my true passion is I like working with systems. I want to get into networking, cybersecurity, like, those big picture things. I love doing those.
Okay. Here's a question for you from a computer science perspective. And this is going to tie back into the previous conversation right at the beginning. What is better, a monolithic system that does absolutely everything, or a distributed class system that functions appropriately for each piece that it needs to work on?
You mean
which is functionally better?
And we should hear from Mance as well, his view on this.
You're referring to basically the idea of having a series of specialized sub-networks instead of one generalist network.
One generalist network or one generalist monolith program. I think in terms of programming code and products, not networks.
In terms of that, you would go with the specialized systems. You always go with the specialized systems, but the problem is you're also dealing with a situation where you can have it in a vacuum. I am coming from when it comes to real life, I'm coming from a more pragmatic position of, hey, people are fucking involved.
Yeah, but this is the other point. Your basic argument falls to the people can't be trusted to be good all the time. Therefore, we need a group of people to make sure people are good all the time.
No, my argument
the key problem
is we have a society that has agreed these are our general ideals. These are our general ideals.
Yes.
We will do what we can to protect those ideals, and we accept that there will be mistakes made in the process, and we'll try to learn and improve from them over time, slowly getting better.
But that doesn't
That's the same
mean
concept that works and with a stateless society as well, though.
Only
That's
on a
not-
extremely
that's
small
not an
scale with
argument
no
to say that the
potential
state
outside threats.
doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's not an argument to
that's-
say that the state works or the state doesn't work. That's just to say
That's the
that
kind
a
of
group
thing
of
that
people
humanity
have
has
decided
done.
this is how we will behave.
We've had that since our inception as a species. That's the thing that, I mean,
Yes.
again, observing bonobos and chimps, you can see the kind of social structures that lead to the kinds of social structures that exist in humanity, and the fact that pro-social behavior is rewarded by society and antisocial behavior is punished by society. And I mean those in the evolutionary biology terms, pro-social being actions that are good for
Shit, I just
society,
saw
and
the time.
antisocial being actions that are bad for them.
Shit,
Hey,
I just
everyone.
saw.
I got to
get
get out of here.
Yeah, same here.
Oh no, man.
I got to get ready for a call. I'm interviewing somebody, so I got to jump. All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough, man.
Look,
Sorry,
I'd love to continue this
didn't
conversation
let you
myself,
speak more.
but
Yeah, be well, man. Anyone who needs to leave can. We will keep the conversation going. I actually have another minarchist that's going to come in shortly too, maybe.
yeah,
Take care, guys.
yeah,
Cool.
I've got clothes to deal with and some errands to run. So
Fair enough, mate.
see you guys.
Y'all have a
See
great
ya.
one.
See ya.
Have a good one, man. Oh well, so close.
Well, I'm
gonna
sure he'll be
this
able
is
to
the
come
thing.
on in the future.
I'm sure
I
he will. This is the thing,
I
though.
did want to point something out for you, Lupin. That doesn't
Yeah.
just work in programming. That also works on a hardware level in computers. That the idea of distributing computation over different pieces of hardware is an incredible way to
Yeah,
increase
Hadoop.
efficiency.
Hadoop
The
and HDFS are amazing systems to work with. They are
a lot
absolutely
of this
incredible.
a lot of this I came to through actually following personal technology hardware. And one of the things that Motorola did years ago when they released the first Moto X is they basically took a Snapdragon chip and they augmented it with another set of 4 individual cores. And those 4 cores were low power cores, but those were tasked with things like location tracking, call, send, receive, the
Basic stuff.
things that are very
One
low
job,
power
do it
tasks.
well.
Exactly. The things that were very low power tasks were put on that smaller chip, and then the larger chip did all the processing for the rest of the device. And it ended up being incredibly efficient, even on a power level, where it was those low power chips were running, and when the rest of the phone was asleep, they weren't drawing the same power as like the Snapdragon, whatever was in it, 600, 650. And you ended up having battery life that was the equal of one of the big Samsung phones that had like a 3,600 milliamp hour battery in it, even though this phone had like a 2,100 milliamp hour battery in it.
Yeah.
And it was fascinating to see that happen. So it works on a hardware level too, where distributing the burden works for any system.
Finian,
Hey guys, how you doing?
how's it going, mate? Yeah, not too bad. Good to see you.
Thanks, you too. Always glad to make these talks.
What?
I said I'm always glad to make these talks.
Yeah.
Hang on.
But yeah, I mean, from a
Oh, by the way, since Finian just joined, there's a story relevant to what he said in the chat there. He said he just got back from the range, and I thought I'd read this this story from Activist Post that which I don't know if any of you know, but it's Vin Armani's joint. But it's written by the author here, Jack Burns, so I'm assuming that it's not very specifically somebody who wants to be known. But its entire county refuses to obey new gun control law, declares itself gun owner sanctuary. I'm just going to read part of that. Amid political buzzwords of sanctuary cities and gun bans, one Illinois county decided to wade into the fray by declaring itself a sanctuary for gun owners. The Effingham County Board voted this past week 8-1 to order its employees not to enforce any laws that would unconstitutionally restrict the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. What?
One quick question. This is from Activist Post, not The Onion or Babylon Bee, correct?
Yes. Effingham is a real name, if that's why you're asking. Effingham County State's Attorney Brian Keebler, I'm not sure if it's Keebler or Kibler, said that the measure is meant to act as a warning shot to tell the state legislator that the county does not want unnecessary gun control measures or for the sale of firearms to be jeopardized. The resolution states the right of the people to keep and bear arms is guaranteed as an individual right under the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution and under the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms for defense of life, liberty, and property is regarded as an inalienable right by the people of Effingham County, Illinois, and the people of Effingham County, Illinois derive economic benefit from all safe forms of firearm recreation, hunting, and shooting conducted within Effingham County using all types of firearms allowable under the United States Constitution. The article goes on to describe how board member David Campbell told Fox News that the county decided it's time for someone to take a hard stand. So I just thought that was interesting. I hope it takes root in other counties.
I personally hope this is the start of the county-level secession movement.
Sure.
Yes, secession! Love it. I love it. I love the whole thing.
One of the things I love about America, and I mean, this is sitting from basically the gun control capital of probably one of the Western world, but one of the things I absolutely love about America was something David Sedaris highlighted. It's talking about local gun laws with like cab drivers when he's getting in and out of book readings. And he said that he likes to talk about the local gun laws because they vary so dramatically from state to state. For instance, the blind are legally allowed to hunt in both Texas and Michigan. Now, in Texas, apparently, you'll have to be accompanied by somebody, but in Michigan, you can go it alone. Now, how the hell does that even make any sense in the first place, especially in this current environment?
Well, there are other senses you could use to shoot.
You didn't know that. You didn't know that all blind people are like Daredevil.
But the other thing that gets me is he could quite happily shoot a camper in the chest, kind of thing, and just completely not know it, take it home and cook it. And but the thing that gets me is how the fuck is he going to know what he's shot or where it is?
I think a blind person would logically, like, I don't think it would need to be legally stipulated that a blind person would need a spotter. Like, I think that's kind of a...
You'd think that, but that's the thing. If he's able to also drive somehow, because I do know that there are ways of being able to do that, and get to the location, there's nothing to stop him, technically, is there? Except his own incompetence. And like you said, he could be Daredevil.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the thing, though, that interests me, too, is like, that kind of comes down to the discussion of like what needs to be stipulated in the law. Like, there's one of the things that law tries to do is be as specific as possible, and because you don't want legal loopholes for things. Yeah. And one of the things that you ran into, there was a story. Shit, I can't remember the specifics of the story, but there was a story. Oh, damn. I wish I could remember this exactly what it was about. But there was a story about a law that had it was a law, I believe, for being part of a specific group, like if you were going to be registered as part of a specific group.
Yeah.
And they didn't put it was an old double jeopardy law.
Oh.
I think. Oh fuck! No, I'm wrong again. I figured it out. I remember it now. It was a law. They gave this dude immunity. This was, I believe, in Texas, and I believe it was the federal government that did it. But it was part of the gun running that the DOJ did as part of Fast and Furious. But they gave this guy who was a drug mule. The Border Patrol shot him in the ass. And as he was running, it was a bad shoot, and because they didn't want him to come back at them, what they basically did was they gave him legal immunity. The problem is they did not specify that they gave him legal immunity for past crimes. And so what happened was this dude came back and he became the drug mule across the border, because if he got captured, he was immune.
Oh, God's sake.
And so they didn't. And so one of the things that law tries to do is it tries to be incredibly specific, because if you're not incredibly specific, you run out of, you end up running into situations where, like this guy, you're legally immune from everything you do in the future if they don't specify that you're only legally immune from the things you do in the past. But that's a question, like what you said, where do you need to legally specify that a blind person needs a spotter to hunt? Like, is that necessary to specify that? Because it kind of is self-explanatory, but you also have people who drink shampoo and that needs to be put on the bottle. So it's a very interesting question, I think, from a legal standpoint, of how much needs to be specified in law and how much is just simply self-explanatory.
And this is one of the things, I mean, as an anarchist, you still have to comprehend the concept of rules. It is very important to be, hey, Porpoise.
What's up?
We're just discussing the concept of law without a state. Because the whole concept, you still need to have rules in anarchy. This is one thing everybody who... Just not rulers. That's the main thing. You don't need to have somebody subjectively putting their reality onto yours.
And for anybody who isn't already familiar, Porpoiseful is a minarchist. He's what is it? National Libertarian.
National Libertarian is what I self-identify as. Yes.
Cool.
Yes.
Well,
that
why
is
don't you
not the same
that?
Apparently as the Libertarian Nationalist, by the way.
Why don't you describe that though?
Libertarian Nationalist, no. Why don't I describe that? Well, I mean, you kind of summed it up. It's basically minarchy, but there is no like minarchistism. Like, you know, you don't really institute that into a political party. It's more of a, it's more like an outlook.
Bracket.
You know what I mean?
It's a classifier, but there are classifiers sub that classifier.
Right.
So here's the big question I've got that I always have to ask minarchists: how do you limit the state?
Like me personally?
No, how not you personally. I mean, how conceptually is it possible to limit the only legitimate provider of force and the only legitimate interpreter of the law?
Well, I wouldn't say they're the only legitimate. I just would say that they have a monopoly on force when it comes to boundaries of nations.
So is the court not part of the government?
Yeah, I'm sure you'd have court. I wouldn't imagine you would have one singular entity as a court.
Well, let's boil that down then. How does it work in the States? We've got one final arbiter that makes the final decision eventually. We have several arbiters in between, but you can always go all the way up to the final arbiter if you choose to.
And the circuit courts are technically federal courts. So even if you don't have to go all the way up to the Supreme Court, the circuit court still stands as a federal court.
Yes. So at every level, you are being, especially in cases where it is the state versus, at every single level, you are being basically tried and judged by the same group, and also have been arrested by the same group.
Theoretically, in accordance to the law, yes. And then, of course, with that, you have your various scales of what the law is under just pure anarcho anything, the basic law, obviously the principle is the non-aggression pact or non-aggression principle, or, do unto others and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Who
Reciprocity.
Who do you rely on when there's a dispute between who actually violated and who didn't violate?
Well, who do you rely on now, and
describing-
why are they better than like another potential party?
I'm not necessarily saying that there is a better or potentially better party.
Well, this is the point. If you don't know who's going to be the best party to either represent you or judge you or protect you, then why is it logical, or why is it efficient or pragmatic even to bestow that to only one entity?
Well, ideally, because that one entity would be specialized in that subject.
Okay, but again, what limits that entity from expanding to cover other subjects like
the only thing
regulation?
The only thing that limits that is the same thing that limits any other form of law, and that would be the society, which would also ultimately limit the same thing in anarchy, whether or not an anarchistic society stays anarchistic or not. So, I mean, it all boils down to the people, regardless of what political proponents you're trying to implement.
Okay,
This is one of the problems, though, with that is that you can't. I think the only realistic answer is that if you have an organization that has a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, which is the definition of government in political science, an organization of the state, an organization with a monopoly on the legitimate use of force, that organization is subject only to the whims of itself. You can buy into the lie of representative government as much as you want, but the simple fact is that if such a government chooses not to be representative anymore, it doesn't however representative it was in the first place, which I question, it has no real bounds that it must stay inside of, especially because it has a monopoly, again, on the legitimate use of force, meaning that if you were to take up arms against it, that
it would be illegitimate.
It would be judging based on Weber's legitimation.
Things are only legitimate until one side wins and decides what is legitimate.
Yeah,
which is exactly the point.
That's the whole basis.
This is
of
the
revolution.
problem.
Well, no,
the
that's
only reason why that. Well, no, you don't. You really don't.
No, hold on. If you and I have a dispute, right? And I argue that you violated me, and you argue that I violated you, we would have to seek, right, in forms of justice, unless I just kill you first or vice versa, right? And the dispute is settled. We would seek
well, no, it isn't, but we'll go into that. But go on.
But hopefully we would seek out an impartial, objective, someone who could balance the stakes and put in their opinion, right?
Yes, I'm not saying conflict resolution is necessary in any society.
Right, I get that, but therein still lies the problem. If we choose Dean, right? How do we both know that Dean is a purely objective? How do we know he knows what he's talking about? How do we know all of
his reputation?
Things?
By his reputation.
Not just that either.
The fact,
not just there's a truly logistical answer to that question. The truly logistical answer to that question, if you're going to talk about the logistics of enforcing social expectations, the truly logistical answer to that question is that you would have the profession of attorney isn't going to go away. The profession of lawyer isn't going to go away. And the profession of judge isn't necessarily going to go away. But what you have to do is there must be things like I mentioned YLYL yesterday. Things that are independent watchdog groups that ensure that these things are being done properly, and competing watchdog groups which ensure that this is being done properly, and that happens now as well in our current system. There are competing independent watchdog groups that ensure that that different organizations, different companies, different products are being produced or are doing
and
business
compatible.
Are doing things in a way that is ethical and legitimate. I don't think
standards and special protections.
Yeah.
I
So
can give you.
there are
you have-
private. Sorry, Finian. You were saying.
I can give you a good example. It's not criminal, and of course, criminal cases are even more of a travesty. But I was sued in court by a landlord, and it was a circuit court, and of course, it was a civil matter. And the guy sued me for damages to a rental that I was living in of his, and he was charging $75 for a child's handprint on a glass, like a glass window. He was charging for his travel time and all this other stuff. And my lawyer was shocked because the judge in all previous cases said that he could not charge for those types of things and that amount for those types of things. He sued me for the maximum amount for it was like $24,999 in civil court. And the judge was actually senile. And we would sit there in court and just listen to him babble on about random stuff until he would just lose his train of thought completely and someone would get him back on track. And at the end of the case, he awarded the guy, this is after I spent $10,000 defending myself, he awarded him 4 of the 24,000 basically.
Okay.
And when he did his judgment, he chuckled and said, "Well, if you don't like my judgment, you can bring it up for appeal." And he laughed. And of course, he can laugh because I have absolutely no other way, no other recourse to get any justice. And the guy that sued me apparently sues every tenant, and he uses the court to rip people off, and the judge doesn't stop him. I have no way to protect myself from somebody like that guy. And the system as it is now
I get
screws
that.
people like me over.
No, yeah, that's the point. The system as it is now, I agree with that wholeheartedly. However, how does the system that anyone else is proposing under an anarchistic system, I understand that logistically you can still hire and all this stuff, lawyers and judges, but how does the concept of corruption change just because it's anarchistic?
That's the problem.
Would not stay in business.
Well, that's the problem, though.
Because of
too,
competition.
That's
That's the whole point of competition.
But there's also the simple fact that if you're saying that the problems between a stateless society and a stated society are parallel, if you're saying that those same problems exist in both, why not go with the one that has the leg up, that leg up being ethics? Why not go with the one, if the problems are the same in both, if the problems run parallel, then why not go with the one that's actually moral instead of the one that is immoral?
It's the null hypothesis argument.
No, because if I'm going to be out 10,000, like honestly, to like real life fam, if I'm going to be out $10,000 regardless of which system it is, I don't give a fuck what the ethical boundaries of it is, because at the end of the day, I'm out $10,000, right?
Well, that's exactly. Well, I
don't get that argument at all.
Yeah, wait a second.
I'm out $10,000, but I feel good about it. Like, what? Like, come on.
Yeah, but in a proper system,
you feel better.
Where there is no double standard or special protections, that guy would not have been able to sue me. He wouldn't even have been able to bring me to court. I was a good tenant that did no damage at all to his house. So in a proper system where the government doesn't have a monopoly on it, that would never happen. He wouldn't be able to get away with it. But because of the way the system's built today, he gets away with it over and over again.
That's
the problem. That is the problem.
It's part of it.
Did you damage his property?
That's what he's saying.
Not being really considered
he
here.
Just said he didn't.
I think what's not being considered here is competition. The value of competition is that when there are multiple systems providing the same service, the ones who provide it the best will generally get the most funding, the most support.
Okay,
and
so
so, realistically speaking, you know, I mean, this is just a service like any other, and it would very likely have to compete. And if people realize that the only kinds of people who would go through a service like that are corrupt, then the service would probably lose a lot of its legitimacy. See, in a system like this, legitimacy would have to be earned instead of facto.
So we have services such as courtship, such as judgment, right? And those services, however, just
compete.
Work, they compete, right? So you and I have a dispute, and we go to Judge A, and Judge A rules in your favor, and I don't like it. Then what? We go to Judge B.
It doesn't quite work like that. It doesn't work like that.
I'm saying. It's not going to.
No, that's not what I'm saying. Porpoise. You're saying that it's not going to work at all. I'm saying the argument you're making
I
is
didn't say it
not
wasn't gonna
how
work at
I would
all.
expect. Well, you are kind.
No, I'm poking holes in it. At all does not equal, you know,
Okay,
there are
that
problems.
implementation of it wouldn't function. I bet let's put it into a situation where somebody actually has done some harm to somebody else, and it is provable, and there is evidence that you can gather, not just a frivolous claim, like in the case of Finian, where his landlord frivolously sued him. In that sort of situation, that would be considered an act of fraud. Finian could countersue. It would be a huge risk for the man to do it. His liability would go up. Yeah, countersue the landlord.
How do you countersue somebody who's not legally bound to show up in court?
If he wants to get his money out of the claimant, he has to show up in court.
Let's say it's me. Let's say he was my tenant and I'm the landlord.
Okay.
I sue him, right? He decides to come to court. I sue him. We get a crooked judge A, right? And the crooked judge rules in my favor, and he's out $10,000 and I get $10,000. He decides to he decides to countersue me, and I say, fuck that, I'm not showing up.
Okay, first off, before the judge isn't just randomly picked like it is here. That's part of the point. The judge is somebody that both of you would have vetted whether or not you wanted to have them arbitrate.
Sure.
And if
or that would have been vetted by an
guy,
outside organization like a watchdog group.
Sure, whatever.
Exactly.
Watchdog
Now,
if he wants
you're
to be
saying the
licensed as
guy's
a
going
judge,
to be. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
No, that's no. This is besides the point. Answer my actual question. We both go to this firmly vetted that we both agreed upon judge. The judge gives me $10,000. Then Finian decides, well, I want to go get another judge. I want to try this case again. I don't think it was fair or whatever. And I just personally decide, fuck that. I can't be asked. I've already got my money. Fuck off. Get out of my property. I'm not going back to a second judge.
So that's when his rights enforcement agency would probably go to try and discuss the situation with your rights enforcement agency.
And what if they tell him to fuck off?
They can't.
If they tell him they can't, because they would have the same problem.
Well, then I guess what we're actually talking about is we have an instituted set of laws then, don't we?
Well, no, you don't. You have a voluntary set of laws.
Well, then I
sign up with groups.
I voluntarily say, fuck off, get out of my house.
Well, then you'll have to prove your case again in court.
No, I won't. It's my property. Fuck off, get out of my house.
Well, this guy is making a claim. At this point,
if you choose to do that as somebody who is renting properties, who's going to rent from you anymore?
It could make me look bad, but
will
the fact
make you look bad.
Yeah, but the fact that
there's as somebody who rents out properties.
Listen, there's millions of fucking people in like every major city, even smaller towns. The small town I live in, there's almost a fucking million people in this damn town.
Okay.
I guarantee you, if I fucked over one of you, I could get my property flipped in a fucking matter of a week, right?
Yeah, especially when it's to 10, and then that becomes a problem because they'll make online ratings for you. You're looking at things in a vacuum.
It doesn't even have to be.
I'm not
ratings.
looking at things in a vacuum. I'm looking at
yes,
things.
You are,
dude. McDonald's as a company has fucked me over, right? Several fucking times. I despise the company of McDonald's. They have a shitty fucking product. They have shitty fucking service. No matter how many times I could get on the internet and say McDonald's fucked me over, McDonald's will still find business.
Yes,
this is one of the problems,
still do
that
it
you're not
damage.
You're
still and you're also still considering a company which is technically a corporation,
right?
Which
but
is fully
listen,
subsidized.
I know that I'm still doing it damage on a nominal scale. My one little review that, to be fair, I haven't fucking done because I can't be asked, right? But if I did a little review,
so my inaction is going to do so much.
Yeah, my inaction is going to do relatively as much as my action would do against a place like McDonald's, right?
That,
we're missing a really
insane?
important point, guys. We're missing a really important logistical point to this. And since we're talking about logistics and not the ethics, well, let's talk about the logistics. Do you consider this for any sector of the economy? In a society that depends very highly upon reputation, in a society that depends very highly upon making sure that things in the consumer interest are watched and let's say enforced, right? That the consumer interest is enforced in the society. There are many avenues to making sure that this happens. Not the least of which is independent licensure that operates in each sector of this economy. So let's say that if you're renting a home, but you're not part of the or certified by the by, you know, I don't know where you live, but let's just say the Texas Renters Association or the Texas Homeowners Association or the Texas whatever, that you don't if they haven't cleared you as a vetted and good person to rent from, and your competition is cleared and vetted as a good person to rent from, then you are not likely to get the same business. You have to consider that there's all kinds of independent methods and independent organizations, watchdog groups and licensure agencies that will make sure that your judges and your lawyers and your doctors and your people who rent their homes and people who sell cars and people who whatever, that all of these organizations would be necessary, much like the MPAA, much like YLYL, much like all of these other organizations that operate outside of government and ensure that things work properly and that things are done right.
And do it better.
Yeah,
so
and you
we have this Independent Renters Association, right? Which on paper sounds fucking amazing, right? But let's say I'm trying to rent my property, and the guy that comes over to interview me or inspect my property for the Renters Association finds something that he doesn't like, or just doesn't like me personally, right? Let's just say that he doesn't fucking like me personally. And he doesn't allow me to join this Renters Association. I would have to go find another one, which is great because we have competition, so I can go find another one, right? So now we have
none of.
Hold on,
Yeah,
let me
but not
finish.
all of them will agree with you.
Right. Okay. So now we have two. I find one and he agrees with me. Right. So now we have two of these contractors associations. Right. A couple years from now, same thing happens. Now we have three. We eventually get up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know, the fucking list goes on. At some point, people are going to just stop looking into these things. Right. People are just going to be like, I need a fucking home. No, I'm assuming human inevitability, right? I'm assuming the logical conclusion that we see from the internet. This is the exact same reason why people look at the headlines of titles instead of reading the articles, because there's too much shit being thrown at them from every single fucking angle. So they just get the smallest little snippet of information they can find. I could personally get on the internet right now and I can make a web page saying fully approved Texas Renters Association, blah, blah, blah. I could just copy pasta another fucking website and I could put me and make up a whole other bunch of names on there. And if people think that I'm legitimate,
and that would be fraud.
Okay,
and that would be something that is a crime, and you could be sued for it.
What crime?
Here's the thing: once I call the Renters Association and say, "Hey, this dude's licensed by you, right?" and they say, "No, he's claiming that he is, but we've never licensed this guy," then they will sue you with
fraud. They will sue you for fraud.
And you would never get membership.
Sue you
no matter
through
what.
Through your rights organizations.
What rights? I'm not applied to any rights organization. That's what you don't
okay. So then, basically, what you're saying is that you don't have a rights enforcement agent. Yeah. So what you're saying is that you're not outsourcing any defense to yourself.
I'm saying that if I have the choice to voluntarily object to being involved in one, then you can't enforce any of those regulations or rules that you've come up with that totally aren't federal or legal laws or anything like that, right? They're just voluntarily joinable. No, you can't. You can't violate my
You violated theirs. You violated theirs. You committed fraud.
Anyway.
You committed fraud.
It doesn't matter anyway. If you commit that kind of fraud, consider this. If you commit that kind of fraud, no one has to contact you. All that has to happen is the individual organizations get a hold of each other and say, blacklist this guy. He's no good.
That's what I was trying to say. Let's say the porpoise example, it would never happen because in my specific example, he sued everybody. No, he sued everybody. So how would somebody that sues everyone, he's got that scam set up. I'm just saying he sues every tenant. So if he has that scam set up, he would never get into such an association. Nobody would ever defend him. He would never be in a group because they would have his court record history, which that judge had. The judge knew this guy's history. He knew that he sued every tenant, and he still let the guy get away with it.
Additionally, what licensure organization would license a senile judge?
Not very many of them.
So then why would that? So this is why we're saying you're not going to have this lifeboat scenario that you're trying to create in a free society that has got massive amounts of competition.
Yeah, nobody's going to rent from you. You'd be in no such membership.
If I own the property and there's more people than there are properties, someone will rent from me. They will have to. What are they going to do? Live on the fucking street?
At their own risk.
Yes,
then they
exactly.
do that at their own risk.
That's the
answer I fucking wanted. A voluntary hearing.
That's the exact answer that I wanted.
How much land do you own?
Huh?
How much land do you own?
This is part of the
problem. A large majority of land.
No, how much land do you own? You don't own a large majority of the land. How much land do you own?
In this hypothetical situation, I can own as much land as I want. All I have to do is have the resources to be able to purchase it from under individuals.
How did you? Well, yeah, okay. How did you get that land? How did you get the money for that land in a society where it's not infinitely printed? I mean, realistically, you're exactly doing what the other people here have insisted you were.
Let's just say,
in a vacuum.
Let's just say I suck.
You're arguing in a vacuum,
and I suck dick for property, right? And I've sucked so much dick that I've gotten 6 city blocks full of property.
It's very unlikely.
All right, so you got 6 city blocks full of property. All right, how many people are going to buy anything out of that land?
We got a bigger problem.
Yeah, I think if real estate is worth that much money, we've got some serious issues.
That's why you can't start it in a vacuum. You have to start from the basis of the economy before you say why the economy is wrong.
You guys know what supply and demand is, right?
Yes, and this is part of the problem. So you're arguing this in a vacuum of just supply and demand.
I'm not arguing in a vacuum. Stop strawmanning my argument, right? I'm not arguing in a fucking vacuum, right? We understand supply and demand, right? We understand it's a real fucking thing. We also understand that land on the planet Earth, livable space, is finite, right?
Yes.
Okay, so eventually, hold on. Eventually, at some point, eventually, it's finite. It is finite.
The universe is not finite, and we can travel to other countries and terraform.
Right? We don't live in a universe.
We don't live in a universe yet. Hang on, wait, what?
Hold on a second. No. You want to argue pragmatism? Let's be pragmatic. Every single human being on the face of the planet could have a house with a yard on a landmass the size of Texas. Land is not finite. Realistically,
that doesn't realistically speaking, land is not really that finite.
Okay, so that's a little bit more accurate. Land is finite. If you think that every single human being on this planet is accepted and is capable and willing to live on small little tiny plots of land, that's fine. I know, however, that that's not the case, especially people that have more money and more power and more resources, especially people who want to provide things like industry. They're going to require more larger plots of fucking land. Land
No, that's not what I'm saying.
That's not what I'm saying.
Is that you're
land unused.
What I'm saying is you're trying to make a pragmatic argument. So let's exist within that realm. In the realm of reality, right? We have more land than we know what to do with. We have more land than any individual knows what to do with, or that humanity as a whole knows what to do with. You want to say land is finite? Sure, land is absolutely finite, but that doesn't mean that that right now it's scarce. Land is not scarce. It might be finite, but it's not scarce.
Exactly. And I would even make the argument it's not finite, because as technology evolves, we will travel into space. As that happens, we will try to terraform or find other worlds that'll actually have more land.
Well, I'd like to keep the discussion within the realm of this millennia, but I mean,
but I don't even think it's going to be that long. That's what I'm
saying though too, is that in this millennium, land is not scarce.
How long did it take you to suck all those dicks? Why are we talking about why are we talking about an infinite level of land or a finite level of land when you've theoretically magically sucked enough cock to get like 6 city blocks?
5 minutes.
Yeah, no. That isn't.
I don't understand why land is suddenly worth a dick suck. That doesn't make sense.
That is not economically feasible.
Well, the only reason I memed out that answer is because I honestly can't even wrap my head around how you guys would question how someone could own so much property.
No, I mean you have to start from basics.
You have to start.
It's not about
It's not me saying that they can't. It's
that.
not me saying that the reasons that they do would probably preclude the sort of parasitism and sort of like, you know, fucking practically thug mentality you're talking about. I mean, realistically, when you form enough business relationships, it isn't mostly dick sucking. It is mostly trying to make sure that the business transaction goes according to the plans of all parties involved to make sure that their effort and energy was properly expended. It is a fucking vacuum because the idea of this sort of thing just sort of existing is not something that would happen in the economic reality. We are talking about like something that would require a huge amount of buildup, and I'm wondering what that buildup is and how that buildup would occur without you building a reputation that you could immediately destroy.
If you're
you're talking about the Ratner effect.
If you're being unscrupulous, the chances of you developing the resources to actually monopolize or close to monopolize any particular market is that's highly unlikely.
That is, unless of course you get the single largest monopoly on the planet, which is the state, which is the single largest gang on the planet simultaneously.
And this is why the state will basically allow that to happen. This is why it works when a state exists, because you can have slumlords who get away with it because they can either bribe the judge or bribe the DA or bribe whomever.
Yes, because bribery
corruption exists.
Bribery goes away when there's no laws, right?
No, bribery goes.
Corruption goes away when there's no laws.
Again,
now you've fallen back on the argument.
No laws. You've now completely strawmanned the argument of anarchy. You do realize that.
Well, it's now you're back on.
But you can't.
Even more importantly,
that's the point. You can have
agreements.
No, you can have agreements, and everyone has to voluntarily agree to it. I've already precluded that I don't voluntarily agree to it.
No one will trade with you. You will be ostracized by the rest of the state.
There are many things written about law without the state. You should look into them.
It's not just that. It's also
law without government.
Purpose. You've also fallen back on the argument that you're purporting that we are saying that, or that anarchists generally are saying that corruption goes away without government. No one's saying that. That isn't the case. But the simple fact that you're making that argument means that you've already placed the problems of statelessness and the problems.
No, don't you? No, I didn't. You guys are bringing up the corruption of the state. I'm simply rebuttaling, right? I'm not making the argument. I'm rebutting to the argument that the corruption of the state just does not magically go away when there's no state. Corruption is an inherent, intrinsic human value.
Okay, but in using that rebuttal, in employing that rebuttal, it doesn't even have to be about that. In reducing that, in employing that rebuttal, you have placed anarchism and statedness on the same level as far as the problems involved. In using that rebuttal, you say that anarchism and statedness will have the exact same problems. You've placed them at parity with one another. Meaning,
I placed them at parity.
Yeah, you have. If you say that
I've never once said they would be at the same level or even relatively close. I have simply said one very simple thing, that you have corruption regardless of whether or not there is a state or there is not a state. I have not argued the levels.
That's parity.
Parity would imply there's an equal amount, right?
No. What you're saying is that the same problems exist.
That the same problem exists.
Well, chances.
You can't make a logical. You can't make a logical argument for the matters of degrees with these things because there's no data whatsoever to make those arguments.
Technically there is because it ties into computer logic. Because if you have a single monolithic program or a single cemented network, it is inherently less safe, less secure, less capable, less efficient. If you have a distributed network, it's much more easily corrupted. If you have a distributed network, it is harder to corrupt. Everything's backed up. Everything's doubly secured. You have specialist groups doing specialist tasks. That's how it works. That's how modern technology works. Pardon me. The same thing can be said for a market-based form of governance, where you have everything provided by a market. And there is no real functional difference except a reduction in corruption because of the increased amount of risk it causes to those who try to do it. If you're going to be corrupt, who's going to trade with you? If somebody else can provide the same service and make sure it doesn't happen to you in future.
Because people will perceive they have no choice otherwise.
Why? That's the whole point.
Because that's how human beings work.
No, you're making a non sequitur.
No, I'm not making a non sequitur. If I join into a town, right, and the town has there's a guy there that owns all the property around the lake, owns the lake, and distributes the water and all this other stuff, and there's a company there that I work for that's pulling oil or energy out of the ground or whatever the case may be. And this guy that owns the lake and this guy that owns the oil refinery station, they said, well, we're going to start making a bunch of jobs. They start making a bunch of jobs. About 20 years goes by. The town literally builds up around them. There's other businesses involved and all this other stuff. What is stopping the guy from the lake from being like, you don't get water, you don't get to do anything, you're fucked here? What's to stop the guy from who owns the lake of amassing resources and buying the property and then fucking people out of their $10,000 as stated before? That's my whole point.
Okay, and that's why we're saying you're arguing in a vacuum, because to get to that point, that guy has to have built that monopoly on the lake
legitimately for 50 years and then just decide with the flip of a switch, I don't want to do it. Or he can inherit it all to his son, and his son could be a fucking asshole.
And then nobody will want to live in the town.
Okay. I get that.
And
nobody will want
somewhere.
to live in the town. Yeah, but
that's the point. They'll move.
Yes, exactly. Now, that's all I want to say is that I just want the answer to be the honest answer, that when shit happens and corruption that is inevitable in human beings, people are going to get fucked, and some people are going to get fucked really fucking hard.
And that's
without the institution of law and checks and balances, which I agree are corrupted and are corruptible, because everything is corruptible. You don't have any guarantees.
No, but you haven't actually said.
You're placing the two at parity again when you say that.
You are, and you're basically saying that without a state, we will have a state. That's one of your arguments.
Yeah, without a state,
without a state, we'll have a state. Yes, now that argument is literally a non sequitur.
Except it's not, because of history.
No, it is, because
why don't we have
conquering another? We do, Zomia.
So this one small specific portion of the world.
This one gigantic location that covers 70 million people.
Your argument that we don't have anarchy like anywhere, that is completely illogical, because realistically speaking, anarchy, like in specific, has probably less than 500 years of even theory, much less practice. So we need to have just as long to test anarchy versus statism. If you want to,
statism has had 5,000 years.
If you want to say that somehow anarchy requires, some sort of like comparison to the state, we need just as much time to test both.
I would argue that
we're the first people that walked this earth and made tools long ago. Those people just were
hunter-gatherer cultures. They didn't exist in a state.
This is the problem
in tribes. There's a very big difference.
You don't even have to make that argument. The argument that we don't have anarchism today falls flat on its face when you consider that most of human interaction is completely voluntary in the first place.
By a spontaneous order.
Most of human interaction is anarchistic by its very nature. The only interactions that are not are those interactions which happen between people and government. So you can't claim that there's no such thing as anarchism today when most of human interaction takes place in the set of circumstances that we would call anarchism.
There's another reason why you can't make the argument.
Anarchistic actions and anarchistic situations is not anarchism, but
no, except that that you're saying that these kinds of things are impossible or that they wouldn't work when voluntary exchange is the basis upon which humanity deals with one another.
I didn't say they were impossible. I didn't say they wouldn't work. I'm simply...
You're saying that the state works better, but you have...
No, I'm not saying that the state even works better. I'm saying that...
Then what are you saying?
I'm saying the same thing that I said last night. You will inevitably have the exact same problems, regardless of whether you have a state or a non-state.
But not in the same concentration.
And a non-state will always formulate into a state.
No, it won't. There is no argument for that.
And it doesn't matter what
the state always sets it up separate and above everybody else. Why would that automatically happen?
Additionally, this is another problem then, Porpoise. If the problems are the same with both, and if the issues are shared based upon human nature with both systems, both statedness and statelessness, if those problems are the exact same, right? If those things are at parity, which is the argument you're making, you can make the argument of degrees, but that argument has no backing to it. If what you're stating is that the problems are the exact same and that statedness and statelessness exists at parity, then you must find which one has the extra point. And the extra point goes to statelessness because of the ethics of the situation. You cannot argue.
I've said 100 times, I don't disagree with that. For the fucking millionth time, I do not disagree that the statelessness is more ethical. What I'm saying is that regardless of the ethicality of it, eventually over time, you will get another state.
That's fine.
I'm not arguing with that. This is the problem. I don't see the reason to that argument, because the argument is implying that if you don't have a state, you have to have
that argument, though.
Well, no. This is one of the things I keep harping on about. Logic. It isn't my logic or your logic. It is a process. Something is either logical or it isn't. And how many people do you
know? No. How many people do you know? How many people do you observe? Out of a percentage of those people, how many of those people, percentage-wise, do you think would not only survive but willingly adapt and willingly concede and aspire to and teach and promulgate the concept of anarchism?
Well, I mean,
I understand the paradigm shift, but human nature does not go away based on a paradigm shift.
No, and we're not saying it does.
There are always
human nature.
This is what I don't like.
No, please let me speak.
When people like,
I don't like
human nature.
Literally, biology goes against my argument.
No, it doesn't, because I will make the argument for human nature. Okay. And please, just let me speak. You're ignoring the concept of risk entirely. And this is another reason why I'm getting a bit incensed. Risk is a critical factor in how human beings comprehend the world. What is risky, we avoid. What is rewarding, we take. This is a very basic evolutionary fact. We have grown up with this. Anarchy is a very risky methodology to solve the problem because it adds risks to the individual. But because of those risks, the individual must behave in a much more ethical fashion. If he does not, the society will punish him outright.
And that's not the argument. That's not the... Yeah, and that's not the only argument either, because if you consider human nature, if you consider human evolution, one of the reasons that Hobbes was wrong is that human beings did not evolve alone. Human beings evolved in groups, and these groups, as human beings, and again, we know this by linking the behaviors of things like chimpanzees with the behaviors of human beings. Is that the pro-social behavior is rewarded and anti-social behavior is punished. And this happens on a social level with or without a state. This is what would have happened in throughout human evolution as human beings became human beings and lived in these tribal situations, is that social retaliation is the answer to anti-social behavior. That's what human beings do. That is human nature.
all you have to do is go to any crowded place and you'll see anarchism. Go to an amusement park. Are those people interacting voluntarily and requiring consent from each other to interact because there's laws and there's a state, or is it because that's the natural state of humans? I mean, do they need all the laws to act?
I can guarantee you that every single one of those people is expecting protection in one form or another from various different things that may or may not happen in that amusement park.
And that doesn't have to go away.
No,
that doesn't have to go away. It's just the method changes, but the concept doesn't.
Right, but without the guarantee that that's not going to go away, you're not going to get people to sign on for that, especially in the current where we're at in the paradigm now, right? If anything, like I said yesterday, like when I was telling you, Dean, that I'm not opposed to anarchy, and I would eventually like to see one day all of this stuff be gradually implemented. But I understand, and I'm sure you guys do too, but you don't. When you argue it, it doesn't seem like you understand it. That's just how it comes off to me, and probably a lot of other people, that you argue for the incrementalist thing or whatever, which is fine, but maybe you need to expunge on that a little bit more every once in a while, because sometimes when you guys say things, it's like, no, you're wrong, this can happen tomorrow, and that's the perception that you guys are putting off. What I'm saying is that it's not going to happen.
I'm not going to claim that it's going to happen tomorrow, because not all of the functions are available privately. In some places they are. Where I live, you can get private police to protect you for a monthly fee, and they have a better success rate than the public. It's a very unusual phenomenon.
Yeah, it is unusual, but the problem is too that
successful as long as they have a better success rate than the public police. If it were to switch in a couple months and the public police were doing better than the actual private firms, then the private firms would go away.
Yeah,
the
exactly,
issue is that
that's the point. They never will.
The market always does better than government, and it's almost always more efficient, and it usually gives better service. Just consider the post office. Consider the level of service that you get from the post office, which is shit almost across the board, and the level of service that you get from something like FedEx or UPS. The one of them needs you as a customer, and the other one's supported by tax dollars. So you can't. So you can't.
It's true for every corporation.
You're not going to get the same level of ineptitude in private business that you do with government. And additionally, I don't think any anarchist who knows anything about.
I don't argue for federally regulated postal services.
Well, no,
we're not saying that you are. We're using it as an example of what we're talking about.
To use against me personally, because I don't.
You agree with it?
It's an example of the.
That's not a reason. It's a bad example.
It's an example of why the inefficiency of government happens and how the market is across the board more efficient. It's just an example of that simple thing. And I do want to point out, though, toward one of your earlier points, I don't think any anarchist who knows anything about sociology is going to say that this should happen tomorrow. There are some anarchists, especially market anarchists, and especially, frankly, anarcho-communists, who think that the whole thing needs to be burned down tomorrow, and we need to rebuild the society that we want. The problem is that's not going to work. That doesn't work as far as sociology is concerned. You have to make the argument to people before people begin to agree with it. And this is one of the things that a lot of people ignore. People who I don't want to pick on you personally, but there's a lot of pragmatists who ignore the idea of incrementalism that I think most anarchists agree with, and the father of anarchism, William Godwin, agreed with, that you can't overturn the structures in society tomorrow. And I don't think there's any anarchist who knows anything about sociology that would say that you can. That said, an end goal is an end goal. And the stops that you make along the way are simply that.
Any service that you have that's protected by double standards and special protections, like our current court and so-called policing forces, is going to be way worse than one that's competitive. I'm a private investigator. Every single thing that we have, including the prison systems, assuming that you even put people in cages, all of it would be better off in a private, being serviced by a private entity. And the reason is because those double standards and special protections would simply go away. They wouldn't have them. The reason why we have people like that same court that I got sued civilly in, they put a guy in prison for 7 years. Everybody in the case knew he was innocent. The judge, the DA, all the cops, and that guy spent 7 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. And it took a sheriff from my county, which is one county down, to help get him out. The only reason why that happened is because the current system is protected the way it is. There is no competition, and it's protected from everybody else having actual justice. There is no justice in our current system.
It's a monopoly.
Yeah.
And that is what happens when you have monopoly. And it takes a lot to make monopolies.
Are these judges elected?
It doesn't help. Everybody in that
matter. No, just yes or no. Are the judges elected?
In some cases, they are, depending upon where you are.
Okay, so
but that doesn't change the.
No, hold on. Let me finish. So corrupt judges are elected. Corrupt judges are chosen by the people. There's a market of judges, and they are put up to task. And people elect. They choose. They put their market backing behind one particular judge. Right? The judge turns out to be corrupt. Some people will find out the judge is corrupt by entering the judge's court and finding out he's corrupt. Other people will hear in the circle or whatever, but the judge gets reelected over and over and over again. It's not
purposeful.
It's not a fault of
You're forgetting it's still a monopoly that's providing the service.
And worse than that, like I used to believe in sheriffs. I actually went through 6 months of training to be a reserve deputy. And I found out my sheriff was just as corrupt as any other council-based chief of police or city council-based police officer. And he was being bought and paid for by the wealthy people. And this exact same thing happens with judges and their elections. That system would break down.
And the reason, you guys didn't let me get to my point. The reason, right, that the judges, like we could elect a totally other judge, you know, if we all decided in our little community to actually get involved and research the people we were electing, right, the problems of these corrupt things, right, they would drop drastically, because as soon as somebody did something corrupt, as long as everybody who voted actually understood the ins and outs of that case, they'd be like, well, this motherfucker is gone, right? We need to get him out and we need to get somebody else in. Since that doesn't happen, I have no reason to believe, I have literally no reason to believe that will change, right? The irresponsibility of the individuals, the mass of individuals, not the singular person who's informed, but the mass amount of people in the area who are making the decisions collectively to choose these people who run these institutions, until they are aware of what's happening and until they are aware and informed enough to even make a basic decision every 2 years for a fucking judge. I don't expect them to do something like be on top of every little intricate detail every day, every week.
You're arguing.
Okay, that's why it's not going to be done by individual people every day, every week. That's what the whole certification systems are for. That's what.
And what
all
about
of
when the
those
certification
other pieces,
systems get corrupted?
What you mean? The competing, multiple competing things are suddenly going to form a syndicate? Come on, you're basically again you're arguing to absurdium now.
This is the thing, though. I do agree with Porpoise. I don't think that people, by and large, yes, hold on. I don't think that people right now, by and large, take responsibility for the decisions they make. They don't take responsibility for the people
right now they don't.
Take
right now they don't.
Paradigm shift.
I absolutely. This is where I'm getting. I think that part of what needs to happen, and this is what we've been arguing with incrementalism, part of what needs to happen is that people need to learn what personal responsibility really is exactly. If you read Godwin,
what their person is.
Yeah, and if you read Godwin, William Godwin, again, the father of anarchist philosophy, William Godwin's point about people's reliance upon a state is that it's rooted in a state of a lack of education, that people simply do not know how or why They would take responsibility for themselves. The answer to a lack of education is further education. That's all we're trying to do. That's all I'm trying to do anyway. Is I'm just trying to push forward the notions that would make anarchism work. And I don't do it because I think I'm going to see it in my lifetime. In fact, I know I'm not. I do it because I personally would like to leave a better future for my kid, for my daughter. I would like to leave a better world. I would like to leave a more ethical world, and one where millions upon millions of people are not victimized by such organizations as states. And I find it difficult, personally, and this is where I believe you and I differ, Porpoise, is I find it difficult to side with what would be considered pragmatism in long run, and in my long run philosophies. I find it difficult to side with what would be considered pragmatism when in the simple fact of human nature means that these same problems are going to exist in any type of society. This is why I'm not a utopianist. I don't believe that anarchism suddenly makes everything peaceful and everybody hold hands and sing kumbaya. I don't think that happens. What I think happens, though, is that if you instill the kinds of ethics in people to make it work, which you must do in order to make it work, this is Godwin's thing, I think if you instill these kinds of ethics in people, regardless of what may happen later, even if the state does come back, and I'll accept that. I'll accept that it might, which should be enough, right? I'll accept that it absolutely might come back. Even so, I still have the knowledge that I'm trying to get to a place that is more ethical and more comfortable, regardless of whatever problems may be there, problems that would be shared by a stated society.
I posted this on my Instagram a while back, like a long while. I don't use it nearly as much as I should, but I posted, "It is impossible to make the world better. Any wrong contributes to a greater pool of wrongs. Instead, make it better than it could be." I stand by that.
This is one of the issues that we talked about when I was taking. Well, I agree. We're working toward in the same direction. I just don't think we're working toward the same goal, and that's the big issue between minarchists and libertarians and anarchists.
No. See. I already clarified this yesterday. We are both ultimately working towards the same goal. However, I know that the goal that
we want to go farther.
No. It's not that you want to go farther. I argue it from a place where I understand that it is not going to happen in my lifetime. So the only thing that I can do is reduce what we already have. And by reducing what we already have, I will probably have more of an impact with the reductionist argument than well, this is what at full scale needs to be ultimately when we're all dead and gone for other generations. Because
it's not a scale issue, though.
Because I used to
cannot grasp that, right?
This is the problem.
That's a point. That's a legitimate point, actually, as far as sociology and conversation goes.
People need to get there. It's incremental again. They need to get the idea of minarchism before they can get the idea of anarchy. But we're trying to get you to see that it is plausible, it is logistically feasible, and it is technically less corrupt because of the way markets work. They become corrupted when they are influenced by states. This is part of the reason why minarchists want no regulation or very, very, very low regulation or just a security system and legal system. But the problem is, and I'll bring you back to what I asked before, how do you limit it? And you never answered me.
I think we ultimately got off into tangents, but
yeah, we did.
Yeah, my whole thing is, and I've said this multiple times. I hope you guys have listened to every single time I've said it. I agree with what you're saying. I've already studied all this stuff. I firmly believe in all of this stuff, that it's actually able to completely come to fruition. And I've even told people, like I agree that the markets will correct themselves. I firmly agree with it. I see it. I've studied it. I've gone through it in my head hundreds of millions of times over different fucking multiple situations. I firmly agree with it. However, when people ask me specifically about the national libertarian aspect, I can't just be like, I can't just argue someone like, well, monopoly will never happen, right? Because we're so close to where we are now that
I don't think anybody's arguing that.
Of course, but nobody's arguing for utopia. Nobody here is.
Stop. Right? These are actual legitimate concerns that people have. So the reason I say that I'm a national libertarian and I argue for a nationalized form of libertarianism instead of a pure, unbiased, worldwide form of libertarianism is because I know that's literally not going to happen in my lifetime. I know also that it's unlikely that I'll actually even get national libertarianism, but it's closer to what we have now that people can relate to it easier.
Sure.
I absolutely understand
I
that
get
from the
that.
rhetorical aspect of it. It makes perfect sense. The issue though is that I'm not going to make the argument though that things that are not ethical are ethical. And this is why I don't call myself a minarchist or whatever, even though I know we've got to stop at that house on the way, like Jeremiah said yesterday. I know we have to stop there on the way, but I'm not going to call myself that because I still don't think it's ethically feasible. I still don't think just because it's part of the road makes it ethical. I think
you've read Rules for Radicals.
Yeah, I've read them. I use them.
Like, do you do understand I feel like this is a rhetorical question. Like, you do understand that we're not going to reach an anarchistic global state, like, and I don't mean state as in like a federally enforced, I mean like a state as in a sense of being
society.
Yeah, we're not going to reach that within our lifetimes. It's not going to be it's probably very likely not going to be reached in our grandchildren's lifetimes, right? So what I am doing is I am looking farther ahead into the future for future generations that may or may not have any biological relation to me whatsoever, right? My family lineage might die off and just be gone by the time any of this actually implements. So my goal is to do what I can now. And if I go too far off the plot and I argue for things that most people, right, I know the ins and outs of it, but most people don't understand this. You have to it's like baby steps, right? So I understand the ultimate end goal, but I also understand the ultimate end goal has already been put down in paper by people who are either A, smarter than me, or B, it's already instituted in like documents like you guys keep bringing up Godwin. That's a great example. Godwin's not going away anytime soon, right? His words, Ayn Rand, her words, all these people, their words are firmly implemented in text. They're going to last well beyond my death, well beyond my children's death and my grandchildren's death. They're going to be around for a long time. So only thing that I can feasibly do to actually be active in the process of changing things for a better in the future is to incrementally argue for these things, not end goal argue for these things, right? Because when you end goal argue for these things, people, and this is my experience, and I because I've been doing this for a long time, right? When I end goal argue, people are like, you're fucking crazy, and they shut down and they don't want to fucking listen. When I incrementally argue, they're more open and apt to it. And that is how you'd make the paradigm shift. The paradigm shift isn't going to just happen. You have to make it happen.
Right. That's true, and that's a fair argument, I'll actually say.
It's a great argument. And this is where I think I actually see the difference in the way that we view the world, which is what I always like to get to when discussing things with people who I don't agree with across the board. I like to try and find the worldview difference that we have. And I think the difference in the way that we see these things, Porpoise, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the difference in the way that we see these things is that where you see product and process as closer linked than I do. I see product and process as two kind of separate entities, and that the process, right, is one thing and the product is another. And so I'm that's why I am an incrementalist, unlike some market anarchists are not incrementalists, and they don't want to compromise on things in order to start walking down the road, right? But process and product to me are totally separate. So product, I'll argue product in one case, and I'll argue process in another. This is why I try to stay up to date on political science and political theory and law, is because that's all process, and product is its own thing.
And let me just say this one thing, because I know Lupinit has to leave. But essentially, I think that this boils down to monolithizing the average person with all the other average people. I mean, next week's topic is going to be environmentalism, and if it matters or not. But essentially, what we're talking about here is human nature, which I don't like it as an argument when Porpoise does it, and I don't like it as an argument when Dean does it. No offense to either of you, but I think that you know, we would have to go watch anthropologically how people operated back in the older societies. I think we would have to basically Doctor Who it and build a time machine to truly study it. But at the same time, I like my personal so I don't want to get lost in the weeds with human nature. My personal approach to it is everybody's got a party. Everybody's got a place that they can be, and everybody's got some sort of way that they can be marketed to either reduce or totally abolish the state, with very few exceptions to that rule. Like, there are some people who are totally non-receptive, but most people have a way they can be reached, and you have to find them where that is instead of trying to jam it through the way you are. So my particular approach is that we need people like Porpoiseful, we need people like Dean, like, you know, Mance, like Bird, we need people like Finian, we need people who can reach people in different ways. We need people like Nina, who was here for the first Shit Shooting Sunday, because we need people to be able to market this to women. And women oftentimes think that that they're part of a club that women can only, you know, join and speak the language of. We need to be able to market this to many groups. And I think thinking of people as something that only one tactic will work with, or only one tactic will work with well, I think that that's a very isolated way of thinking of it, and I won't do it. I want to get this in front of as many people as possible in as many ways as possible, which is why I'm willing to allow people that I totally disagree with, like might be happening next week on my Shit Shooting Sundays here, because while this is an informal stream, I think the fact that people are arguing with one another is very beneficial and productive, especially since refining that sort of thing in the fire will make you better at arguing for national libertarianism, Porpoise, and you better at arguing for complete anarchy, Dean, Finian, and Lupinin. So, I mean, reasonably speaking, there's always a way to reach people, and that's what I want to get across, because the only way this thing is ever going to have the paradigm shift in real terms, in concrete terms, is if we act like a body of people who have a niche for every niche.
Yeah, I mean,
I want to let, before we get too far on that, I want to let people know Nina Maria Bastiat is awesome, and she is at Esta Docida on Twitter.
Well, Estado Cida.
Nice one, mate.
If you wanted to pronounce it.
Yeah, Estado Cida. I'm not good at those languages.
You know, I'm going to be making a run, guys. Porpoiseful, I really did appreciate the conversation. It didn't descend into any ad hominem or anything. What you're trying to do is valid. I'm not going to say it isn't, because you're right. We probably will never see this in any of our lifetimes. I would hope that singularity actually occurs before some of this, so I might be able to see it as a computer fucking program.
Technocracy.
We'll see.
But like,
I'll take it. If I can be uploaded, I will be happy.
I do want to see you all here next week, because we're talking environmentalism, and that ties in directly with that particular end of this video.
Okay.
All right. So I'm gonna have to go to my daughter's coming back from her grandmother. So yeah, I'm gonna leave with Lupin.
Fair enough. See you, Dean. But yeah, for me, I just wanted to add one thing. The only reason I don't argue the pragmatic approach on a regular basis is to remain consistent and remain as logical as I can. And
that's why I don't either, but I'm fine with people who do.
I am as well, because they are getting us towards the goal.
As long as they're willing for me to call them border cucks.
Yeah, I embrace it, actually. So I mean, it works.
Yeah,
fair enough. But I mean, if you accept that there are flaws to it, I'm happy.
But anyway, I hope to see you all next week.
The end result is better.
That's my primary thing. I hope that y'all show up next week, because I think that when we really dig into our impact on the planet, I think that that's going to pull out a lot, roguefile.net
Oh yeah,
I think so.
Especially for the private
alternative internet radio, AIRAD.io, and roguefile.com.
Yeah, anybody want to plug anything?
I will see you guys.
Good night.
And by the way, I just enjoyed AIRR. So I just joined AIRR, so I will be posting my moment of rage there as well.
Mm.
Yeah. So anyway,
all right, guys.
Be well, everyone. I am going to end this broadcast relative. Oh well, Finian, did you want to plug something also purposeful?
I'm good. I was just gonna say what everybody else was saying, that the end objective is what is important. And like Friedman's son, I think, was saying in one video recently, like how each individual gets there or furthers us towards that goal doesn't really matter. And the more people we have taking different paths, the better. So if anybody working towards individual liberties objective is a friend of mine. So, and yeah, the only site that I'm really on these days is steemit.com as Finian. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I already stated. I mean, I like all you guys, even Finian. I've never met you, but yeah, you're fine. I don't. my personal philosophy is there is no hate. To hate someone is to actually be passionate about someone. So yeah, just writing them off is about as woke as I fucking get there.
Yeah, but, apathy is the worst thing you can have for somebody.
Yep, exactly. But even then, if they're open to bait you, like Jeremiah said, and make your arguments, flesh them out, and give you something to think about, that's use them.
there are a number of socialists that I have to admit have had to make me formulate arguments that I couldn't have gotten out of my head otherwise. And they've then gone on to be entire blog posts.
Yep, that's why I've been recently to the people that are or more on like the religiosity side of things that I discuss or whatever. They've been recently on this kick of like playing God, because it's that's starting to get into like biology and gene manipulation, starting to get serious and all this other stuff. I'm like, you guys have to understand, like even under like I've studied religion as along with philosophy, so I've studied lots of different religions, and I understand that most of them actually, maybe even all of them are more similar than not. And one of the main things that they all have in common is that God or gods, whatever, whether it's mono or poly, the gods created, the physical realm. They created our bodies and then gave us this thing called free thought. And then they gave us control of the natural world. So to think that like the biological aspect of like, maybe one day I'll have a techno-organic arm, or I'll be able to implant a chip in my brain if I want to, that'll download GPS, navigation coordinates, and I'll just be able to know where I'm going and shit like that. Like that's, in my personal philosophical theological opinion, that's not playing God. Playing God is things like censorship.
Yep. Yeah, or when people say you can't question the truth anymore, because of course one of the keys to truth is all of us, no matter what our perspective is, we should be allowed to question it and debate it.
Yep. And I hope to see y'all next week so that we can debate environmentalism and human impact.
Sounds good.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Well, be well, everyone. This, I think, was pretty productive. I'm ending this broadcast relatively soon, and there will be a post show with cookies in the dark side.
See you guys.
Good night, everybody.